Hey guys. This is part 7 of What If Naruto Was Luffy's Sister. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 24, The Aftermath. Once the battle had truly ended with the defeat of the flying pirates, and the shocking sight of the Sea Kings carrying Noah to the sea forest before they left, the people of the Fishman Island finally were able to breathe a sigh of relief. With their victory over their enemies, everyone was overjoyed as they cheered and expressed their good feelings towards their saviors. They praised the bravery of the princess and the princes. They also praised the Straw Hats crew who worked together with the Neptune army that was led by Jinbe himself in saving the citizens and defeating the new Fishman pirates. They also didn't forget to mention their previous act of saving Princess Shirahoshi from that despicable Vanderdecken earlier. Among their saviors, the people of Fishman Island were mostly impressed with Luffy, who had single-handedly defeated Hody Jones with his own abilities and strength. As a family member of the infamous Yuzu, and also the captain of the crazy pirate crew that dared to go against the world government for one person, they had a high expectation for Luffy and instantly had a good opinion for the whole crew. Hence, the friendly welcome that they received when they first arrived here. But what they had shown the people today definitely proved that they were very much worthy of their fame and reputation as a famous pirate crew. Naru was also praised for her transformation ability. After all, it wasn't every day that they could see someone who claimed that she didn't consume any devil fruit to transform herself into a Sea King in order to defeat the sea serpent. Their level of respect for the leader of Yuzu went up even higher than before. While the people were happy that the battle had finally ended and nothing happened to their home, however, their joyous celebration didn't last for that long. Once they returned back to the island, the first thing that Naru did was to check upon the condition of her people. She was relieved to know that none of her people had died. Kanana and Olympius were the ones that suffered the worst injuries, but thankfully, they were treated just in time to prevent their wounds from becoming even worse. The others only suffered light injuries and most of them were fine. However, the same couldn't be said about the people of the Fishman Island, because there were actually among them who had truly died under the brutality and merciless attacks of the new Fishman pirates. The unfortunate victims were stabbed, poisoned, and even got caught in the explosions as soon as the pirates started their raid. When help arrived, it was already too late for them to be saved. This certainly upset King Neptune, who considered himself to be a complete failure as a ruler of the kingdom. The celebratory moment that they all shared together a while ago had been replaced with a gloomy and heavy atmosphere once reality hit them hard. There were those who couldn't control their emotions and proceeded to vent their anger and grieve towards the chained Hody and his crew, who were still sitting quietly at the plaza. Rocks and insults were thrown and the situation turned chaotic, forcing Naru and King Neptune to step in and order for the criminals to be taken away to the prison. The violent reaction coming from the citizens certainly upset the Ryugu family, especially Shirahoshi, who never wished for any of these to happen. With the pirates finally out of their sight, the people calmed down and started to mourn properly. Even the usually loud Straw Hats crew didn't act like how they always do. In such a gloomy and serious situation, not to mention that even their captain was unusually quiet and docile as he stood next to his sister, the Straw Hats members wisely behaved well. The funeral was done on the same day at the sea forest. Even though there were not that many who died, everyone attended the funeral to pay their respect anyway. It was very hard for them to accept the fact that just earlier today, those who were killed were still laughing and joking around with their family and friends as usual, and were now gone forever in just a few hours. It was regrettable, but there was nothing that could be done other than to move on with their lives as they continued to remember and honor those who had been sacrificed due to another person's greed of power. After the funeral was done, the crowd dispersed and returned to do what they should or could do. The Ryugu family returned back to the Ryugu Palace with their guests that included Naru and the Straw Hats crew. On the other hand, Hyde went to follow Jinbe to do some investigation and interrogation over the events that happened today. Before they left, Naru summoned some clones to watch over the sea serpent with some of the Neptune army. A huge multiple chains were placed over its body, just in case it suddenly started to wake up and get out of control like it did before. Sending one last glance at the chained sea serpent, Naru then followed the rest of them out of the forest. Once they returned back to the palace, the almost collapsing King Neptune apologized to Naru before excusing himself. Fukaboshi and the rest of his siblings also excused themselves as they were worried over their father's health since he was badly wounded by Hody earlier. Thus, leaving only Naru and the Straw Hats alone. Luffy then complained to Naru that he was hungry and that he hadn't eaten anything since they met Jinbe earlier today, much to her amusement. She then led the entire crew to the dining hall to have a hearty meal. Not long after that, Naru stated that she would be leaving first with the excuse of having another matter to be settled. Thinking that whatever matter that she was talking about would be a boring job, Luffy bid her goodbye as he continued to shove more food into his mouth. The last thing that Naru saw before she left was the sight of her brother being scolded by Sanji due to his poor table manners. After the Straw Hats were done with their meals, somehow all 9 of them ended up hanging out at the beautiful garden near the entrance of the huge palace. The guards that saw them didn't bother them, instead they greeted them cheerfully, and even prepared another bunch of newly made food to these great people, much to Luffy's delight. So what are we going to do now? Usopp suddenly asked after a few moments of silence. Do what? Zoro yawned. The green-haired swordsman had already made himself comfortable as he leaned his back on the huge statue of King Neptune. I mean, shouldn't we discuss our next plan after this? Afraid that they would think that he wanted to leave as soon as possible because he disliked it here, he quickly added, it's not like I don't like it here or anything, and I'll also find that Naru-san is a great person and all, but we should at least have a plan of what we should do next. Right? Well, it's all up to the captain. Nami pointed at the said captain, and everyone turned to stare at him. To the new world, of course. Luffy answered with a wide grin after gulping down the rest of his food. The crew looked excited. When? Soon, was his only answer. Are you perhaps waiting for Naru to finish with the works here so that we can sail away together, Luffy? Robin asked with a knowing smile. Luffy looked at Robin, surprised. Whoa, Robin! How did you know? In fact, Luffy was indeed thinking of waiting for his older sister so that they could go on an adventure to the new world. He knew that she was supposed to be leaving this place long ago, but apparently she was concerned over the matter of the pirates, that she overstayed her visit here. At least that was what she told him before. But Luffy would like to think that his older sister was just waiting for his arrival here. Plus, it was his dream to set sail with his sibling ever since he was little. It would be even more great if Ace and Sable were to be here with them too. I don't mind that, Luffy. Usopp raised his arm to show that he agreed with his idea of bringing along his older sister with them. With such a powerhouse on board the same ship as them, Usopp considered their next voyage to be a smooth ride. What Usopp the coward thought was naturally the same as what Nami was thinking about. Considering the crew's penchant in getting into some unexpected and unwanted troubles, the navigator was more than happy to have someone as reliable as the Yuzu to be sailing with them. And from what she could see based on the siblings' interactions, Luffy was quite obedient when it came to his sister's words, which for Nami was quite a good thing. So she asked Luffy then, are we going to follow Naru-san back to her place? Naru's place was naturally the infamous Yuzu, or the Whirlpool Kingdom. Hearing that they might be going to Yuzu after this, the crew looked expectantly at Luffy. Especially Sanji and Usopp in particular. I heard that there are a couple of giants there. Maybe they will tell us the way to Elbaf. Usopp wondered with sparkles in his eyes. Really? Chopper asked. He didn't know why he was excited when he didn't understand anything, but he was just excited and happy as long as his friends felt the same way. And I heard that the ladies there are really beautiful too. Not to mention that I can still see beautiful mermaids there. It is confirmed. Yuzu is my all blue. Luffy, we're going to Yuzu after this. Stupid cook. Zoro scoffed at him. What did you say? Sanji's mood changed from being happy to being annoyed real quick. Stop it, you two. Nami gave them the dead glare, and they immediately stopped. Yes, Nami-swan. TCH, whatever. Zoro muttered quietly under his breath before closing his remaining eye to ignore everyone. Then Luffy, are we really going to follow Naruto back to Yuzu? Chopper asked. Luffy nodded. I will talk to Nachan later. I'm sure she would be happy to know that we're coming with her. He also didn't forget about his big brother. We can also meet Ace there. Nachan said that Ace is living with her now, and he's also a captain of his own pirate crew again. Hearing that Ace was also there too, the crew had no reason to say no. They then discussed more of their possible journeys in the later days. But not long after that, they saw two figures going through the palace gate. Luffy's eyes brightened as he broke into a smile when he recognized one of the two figures that were getting closer. Well, he recognized both of them, but he was more interested in a certain someone than the other one. Jinbe. The two figures were precisely Jinbe and Hody, who had just finished with their interrogation and investigation of the events that happened today. Luffy-kun. The fishman returned Luffy's friendly greeting with his own friendly smile. What? No greeting for me? Hody asked next to Jinbe. Oh, you're the mist guy. Luffy pointed a finger towards him as he stared at Hyde's lower body, as if he was expecting the older man to turn himself into a mist right away. Hyde sighed at the way he was called by Luffy. It's Hyde. How many times do I have to you know what? Never mind. I'm just going to return back to my room and get a well-deserved rest. But before he could even take a step forward, Luffy stopped him and asked about Neru's current whereabouts. I haven't seen her since hours ago. She's probably busy doing something. Who knows? The green-eyed man answered as he shrugged his shoulders. He then walked away from them. But before he could go far, he suddenly turned around and looked at the Straw Hats crew. By the way, you guys did pretty awesome back then. I was quite impressed. The members were obviously happy with the sudden compliment coming from the man. The easily excited members of the crew cheered while members like Zoro and Sanji just smirked. After that, with Hyde already gone into the palace, there were only the Straw Hats and Jinbe left at the garden. The others watched silently as Luffy was being super friendly with the former Shichibukai. Since he considered the fishman to be a good friend of his, the others naturally had a good feeling and opinion of him. Especially when he was there in their place to support and help out Luffy 2 years ago. The crew was, of course, grateful for his help. Plus, with the way he handled the matter with Hody earlier, and saving so many citizens as he led the entire Neptune army despite being a pirate, it proved that Jinbe truly had a good character. The crew was naturally on good terms with him. However, one person couldn't help but to have mixed feelings as he observed the former Shichibukai closely. While Sanji admitted that Jinbe truly had a good personality, and that he believed that Luffy wouldn't judge a person wrongly. But it was impossible for Sanji to shake away the feeling of doubt in his heart when he knew what the fishman had done while he was still a Shichibukai years ago. Turning his attention away from Jinbe, who was having a friendly conversation with the crew, Sanji stared at the smiling Nami with a thoughtful look. She seems to have a good impression of him, he thought. And that was quite worrying in his opinion, because he didn't want the orange-haired woman to feel hurt upon knowing the truth later. As a gentleman who despised seeing a lady being sad, Sanji went ahead to interrupt the ongoing conversation between them and said to Jinbe, Jinbe, were you the one who was truly responsible for letting Arlong loose in the East Blue? Hearing that familiar name, Nami went still and she unconsciously had the impulse to touch her left shoulder. She and the rest looked at Sanji in confusion and wondered as to what he meant by the sudden question. Especially Jinbe, who froze upon hearing Sanji's words. Arlong? You mean that Arlong? Usopp broke the somewhat awkward silence when nobody was making a sound in favor of staring at the unmoving Sanji, who in turn hadn't stopped staring at Jinbe with a judgmental gaze. What do you mean that Jinbe was the one who let Arlong loose in the East Blue, Sanji? While the last 4 members of the crew hadn't had a clue of what the others were actually referring to, they instinctively knew that this was a sensitive topic based on how Usopp, Nami, and even Jinbe reacted. Those 3 had a surprised and serious look on their faces, while Luffy and Zoro didn't show any emotion on their faces as they paid close attention to Sanji and Jinbe. The other 4 knew that whatever it was that they were talking about had happened way before they joined the crew, so they stayed quiet and just observed the situation on the sideline. Exactly what I said, Sanji stated as he stared directly into Jinbe's eyes. According to Yasaku, Jinbe, you were the one who used your status as a Shichibukai to set Arlong free in the East Blue. When your name was mentioned alongside Luffy's name in the newspaper 2 years ago, I actually had my own doubts about you. I thought that you were just another corrupted evil bastard who used his power selfishly, but I know now that I was wrong about you like that. Sanji continued. So that's why, no matter how good of a person you are now, you still need to explain yourself about what you have done. Luffy may think of you as a good friend who helped him out, but regarding this matter, I will not let this slide just like that. Because Nami-san was the one who suffered a horrible nightmare because of Arlong's tyranny over her hometown. Those who didn't know about Nami's story widened their eyes at his words, while the likes of Zoro and Usopp only stared quietly at Sanji. Even Luffy didn't say anything that could make the situation worse and get himself into trouble. So Jinbe, if you have something to say for yourself, then we will listen. But choose your words wisely because what you say next will decide whether or not I will forgive you, Sanji declared. Jinbe lowered his gazes to the ground, avoiding everyone's stare as he clenched his fists. While he was thinking of his past before he became the Shichibukai, Nami was also thinking of her horrible past before Luffy and the others came into her life and saved her from her darkness. Her mother's death, Arlong's tyranny, and her years of suffering. All of those unwanted memories played inside her head, and that unconsciously made her feel upset. Jinbe looked at Nami with compassion and said it seemed that you endured a lot of cruelty because of my decision. His words said it all. He was the one responsible for letting Arlong loose in the East Blue in the first place, and unconsciously became the root of all the problems caused by the Arlong pirates. It was also safe to say that because of his decision, Nami had suffered. Silence. Nobody said anything as the one who should be addressing the issue now was the navigator herself. Even Sanji remained quiet. The blonde-haired man only lit a cigarette and smoked. After a while, Nami opened her mouth and said true. No matter what happens now, I'm not planning to forgive him, or even forget what Arlong has done to me, my family and my hometown. I don't even want to have any shred of compassion for him. But... Nami paused and thought back of when she was in Sabaody Archipelago and witnessed the cruelty of humanity towards Hachi, and the event of Kami's kidnapping of where she would be forced into slavery if it weren't for them to arrive just in time to save her. And of course it was also thanks to Rayleigh for freeing the mermaid, but the sight of Hachi being treated like something worse than trash by the rich people there just because he was born as a fishman made Nami understand as to why Arlong hated the humans very much. Because when she noticed the structure building of the Sabaody Park resembled the Arlong Park in her memories, she was honestly surprised. Back then, he treated her and the rest just like how the humans treated Hachi and Kami in Sabaody. But still, that didn't excuse him for killing her mother and caused her and her townspeople to suffer. Clenching her fists, Nami took a deep breath and said, I hate Arlong, that is a fact that will never change. Nami. Chopper looked at the orange-haired woman worriedly. When he felt a hand touching his head, he looked up and saw Robin shook her head at him before giving him a comforting smile. He then moved closer to her and watched Nami silently again. But I don't blame everyone. Hachi was also a part of the Arlong pirates back then. But I forgave him, didn't I? I know how to separate good and bad from each other, Nami said as she flicked her hair. And I know very well that Luffy didn't judge wrongly when he claimed you to be his friend, Jinbe. Also, thank you Sanji-kun, for standing up for me. A small smile returned to her face as she thanked the blushing Sanji, who immediately gave her a thumbs up with a heart sign in his eye. Don't worry Nami-swan. I will do anything for you. Nami winked at him, before she continued. This time, she was smiling at Jinbe. So don't worry. The one that I hate is Arlong. I don't know why you chose to release Arlong in the East Blue of all places, but the past is the past. I moved on, and I don't blame you for what he did to me. The crew smiled at her words, feeling glad that Nami was now smiling with a bright look instead of the gloominess that they saw on her face earlier. Jinbe didn't know what to say. He was already prepared to be scolded or even beaten up, but instead he received a smile. Although he was grateful for the kindness, he was aware that he owed the young woman an explanation as well. So he said, "I thank you for your kindness, Nami-san. But I still feel like I should still give an explanation on my part, like what Sanji-kun said." So Jinbe started by telling them of the suffering that the people of this island had gone through for years. Even though there were still humans who were hating on them today, his people didn't give up and still continued the struggle to be a part of the world above. Just like how the citizens here fought against Hody's beliefs and continued to support the alliance between the Fishman Island and Yuzu. Jinbe stated that the worst period of their lives would be the beginning of the Great Pirate Era, as there were many pirates that visited this island in order to reach the New World. And most of them were not a nice bunch either. But fortunately, the late Whitebird came and saved them by putting the island under his protection. But sadly, even with Whitebird's protection, the hatred and disgust against their race didn't stop. And because of that, their queen Otoheim had suffered from it. It wasn't just her alone, but their greatest hero, Fisher Tiger, also suffered the same fate because of that hatred. Fisher Tiger? Usopp questioned. Jinbe nodded and explained to the confused crew of who was Fisher Tiger. Brother Tiger was just like Queen Otoheim, and yet so different, even though they both were against the discrimination against our people. While Queen Otoheim wanted to form a friendship with the humans, Tiger believed that humans and fishmen should live separately. The story of Fisher Tiger went back at least 2 decades ago. He left the island and returned back after a long journey, as he told everyone. But the truth was that he was captured by the world nobles and became a slave for years in Marigios. Although he managed to escape, he was also reluctant to let the other slaves to continue suffering in that place. Hence why he returned back to that cursed place on his own and freed the other slaves. After that, he formed the Sun Pirates, which consisted of him as the captain, and the fishmen that were also the former slaves of the world nobles like him. The cursed mark that they had gotten from the world nobles was rebranded and resembled that of a sun in order to hide their shameless pasts. When he formed the Sun Pirates, he told his crew that their ultimate goal was to free those who were oppressed, and not becoming a group of cold-blooded murderers. Tiger refused to become like those cruel humans who would kill anyone regardless of what reason. Later on, the crew started to grow as they accepted many young recruits like Jinbe and Arlong. One day, when he was sending back a young human slave back to her village, Tiger was betrayed by the villagers. And in the end, he died because he rejected the idea of a blood transfusion with humans' blood. Because of his shameful past, he ended up hating the humans for their cruelty, and he could never bring himself to love and accept humans as long as he was alive. To Jinbe and the rest of the Sun Pirates, Fisher Tiger was a true hero because he could still disregard his hatred and saved many slaves regardless of their races. In the end, he died with a smile on his face. Whoa! Usopp gaped at Jinbe. The crew was speechless and didn't know what to respond after listening to his story. So he was a good guy then. Luffy was the only one who was positive and grinned at Jinbe's story. "What, Tiger is the real man?" Frankie exclaimed as tears continued to stream down his face. Jinbe then continued, saying that because of Tiger's last request, the crew didn't tell anyone of the true reason behind his death. After Tiger's death, the Sun Pirates were divided into 3 parts. One of them being Arlong's crew, while Jinbe took over the Sun Pirates and became the captain. Jinbe then joined the Shichibukai rank with the belief that bringing the fishmen and humans together was something that Fisher Tiger would have wanted no matter how much he claimed to hate the human race. The crew respected his wish, but his death completely changed the crew's view of humans once again. For example, Arlong. Because of Tiger's death, Arlong grew to hate humans even more than he already was and ended up attacking the marine that was responsible for Tiger's death. But he was captured by Kizaru instead. And Jinbe, who was the sworn brother that grew up together with Arlong, felt responsible for him and used his privilege as a Shichibukai to release him. Jinbe then sighed. "But I didn't expect that Arlong's hatred towards humans was so big that he caused trouble for your hometown, Nami-san. As his sworn brother, I feel responsible for him. I was supposed to be there if something went wrong, but I didn't expect that Arlong would bribe a marine officer so that the HQ didn't get any information. When Nami heard that last part, she remembered the rotten marine that was in cahoot with Arlong, and immediately frowned. As for Queen Otoheim, you guys already know about what happened to her. After her death, the Ryugu family still continued her legacy and did their best to convince everyone to be on friendly terms with humans. And their efforts did pay off, especially after Naruto came. Jinbe briefly told them the story of Nara coming to bring along the many fishmen and merfolks that she saved from the world nobles. In a sense, she somewhat reminded them of the late Fisher Tiger and Queen Otoheim. The beginning of their bright future happened when most of the fishmen and merfolks that she saved declared that they wanted to continue staying with her on her land, which would later be known as Yuzu. At the sudden mention of Nara's name, the crew was impressed yet again with what she had achieved. Truly amazing. Therefore, Nami-san once again. I am sorry! Jinbe bowed his head to Nami. Nami in response just sighed when the former Shichibukai didn't lift his head when she hadn't said anything. She shook her head and said, I told you, I'm really fine and I don't blame you at all. Plus, I know that you're a good guy, and I'm glad that you're not the one pulling the strings of Arlong's crew. And since you're Luffy's friend, then all of us here also consider you to be our friend. The crew grinned and gave their own words of encouragement to him too. Nami is right. From now on, you're our friend, Jinbe, Usopp said, and Chopper immediately agreed. Yes, Jinbe. Jinbe-san, you're so cool when you were talking back to Hody earlier. As expected. Nami Swan is so beautiful when she is being kind. Seeing the crew's warm attitude towards him, Jinbe felt so touched that he almost cried. Shishishishi. Luffy snickered as he watched his crew interacting with Jinbe warmly as if the previous serious conversation didn't just happen. By the way, Jinbe, did you know that Ace is in Yuzu now? That's great, because my crew will be following Nei-chan back to Yuzu after this, Luffy said after a while. Jinbe blinked at Luffy. Ace-kun? Going to Yuzu? But I thought Naruto said she wanted to go to Dressrosa after this? Puzzled with his words, Luffy asked, what do you mean? I heard from Naruto before that Ace-kun is now in Dressrosa with Yuzu-san. So after the matter here is settled, Naruto will be departing to Dressrosa to meet up with them. But what are they going to do there? Robin appeared to be surprised with Jinbe's words. What's wrong, Robin? Nami asked. Robin then explained to them that Dressrosa was a kingdom in the New World that was currently being ruled by the Shichibukai, Don Quixote da Flamingo. Since everyone knew that Yuzu used to be a world noble and even being the younger cousin of da Flamingo, she had no reason to be there at all. Especially Ace, whom everyone had recognized to be under the protection of the Uzukage. Not to mention that said Uzukage would also be going to an enemy's territory soon, so what did this even mean? Usopp's face suddenly went pale. A.S. Shichibukai? He took back his words about having a leisure vacation. If they follow Luffy's older sister, then wouldn't it mean that they were going to be involved in some serious shit in the future? His natural instinct to sense danger was never wrong. Then Jinbe, what is Ace doing there? According to Naruto-san's words, Ace-kun will be participating in a battle competition to win Old Man Whitebeard's devil fruit, the Gura no Mi. The Straw Hats members widened their eyes in surprise. Gura no Mi. Location: Dressrosa. On the beautiful street of Acacia, it was unusually quiet during the nighttime, compared to how it was when the sun was still up hours ago. That was to be expected, since all of the good citizens in the kingdom had already returned back to their respective houses before the sun had even completely disappeared into the horizon. Even the shops and restaurants were all closed, leaving only the street lights to give some light at this place. But the question was, why? Well, that was probably because of that one law that had been set by the current ruler of Dressrosa, who had banned anyone or anything from roaming the streets once the sun was replaced by the moon. Every day, the citizens would start to go home before it was completely dark. Nobody actually wanted to disobey the law and face Doflamingo's wrath. Because the punishment for disobeying his law would usually lead to a punishment by death, or being thrown into the Colosseum and suffer fate worse than death. While the locals enjoyed the brutality and savageness shown by the fighters and gladiators as a form of entertainment, it didn't mean that they wanted to participate in such a savage activity and be the ones to suffer from it. The amount of people that had died in the Colosseum was not a small amount either. Plus, no matter how much the locals admired and respected Doflamingo for making their life better and turning their poor and average country into a great and prosperous kingdom, they still had that sense of fear for the Shichibukai, who was also the captain of the Don Quixote pirates. Nobody was daring enough to break the rules that he had set since he took over the throne of Dressrosa 10 years ago. But of course, no matter how terrifying the punishments prepared for the lawbreakers, or even the horror of facing the wrath of an angered Doflamingo, there would still be people out there who were too stubborn, brave, or just plain stupid enough to break his law. Especially for the people who didn't live in this kingdom. Just like these two individuals who were currently standing together side by side in a dark alley as they were blessed by the moonlight. One was a man with long messy hair that reached his shoulders. The upper part of his hair was tied into a ponytail, making him quite attractive in the eyes of the ladies that had seen him wandering around in the broad daylight for these couple of days. He was wearing a cloak, and when the cold night breeze brushed against his cloak, it was revealed that he wore nothing underneath it to cover the impressive sight of his upper body. Thankfully, he was wearing short pants. On the other hand, his companion was a tall woman with short brown hair. Like her partner, she was also wearing a similar cloak. And when the cloak was swaying gently because of the wind, anyone could see the soft green jumpsuit that she wore, completed with a Victorian white collared shirt with long sleeves underneath it. She was also wearing a pair of high-heeled boots that reached just below her knees. In a normal scenario, the sight of a man and woman alone in the dark alley as they stood together underneath the moonlight would certainly give off a romantic feeling to whoever was seeing them at this moment. But unfortunately, these two were anything but romantic to each other. Especially not when there were multiple bodies lying around them, seemingly to be unconscious by the lack of movement coming from them. Upon a closer look, one could see the puddle of blood forming underneath the bodies, with some of the blood even splattered on the walls. Some even got onto the cloak of the woman who was holding a sword that she used to slash these people to death. The woman wiped her sword clean using her already dirted cloak. Once she was satisfied with how clean her precious sword was, she removed the cloak from her body and had it thrown to the nearest dead body in front of her. The man frowned at her actions. You could have just knocked them out instead of killing them. The woman merely scoffed at his words. She sheathed her sword back, before making her way to check upon the bodies one by one to make sure that every single one of them had truly died. She didn't want to leave even one of them to be alive, not when they had already figured out their identities. You think I would just let even one of them escape from me? She said once she was done with her inspection. Do you even understand what it means to lay low? We can't afford to be discovered now, you brat. The man said nothing, and the woman went to stand in front of him, and casually placed the tip of her sheathed sword at his neck. If you still want to obtain that Guruguru no Mi, then I suggest you stay still and don't cause any more trouble. I didn't come here willingly just to look after you and get myself into unnecessary troubles, you hear me? If it wasn't for Leader Sama, do you really think I would want to be here? Watch your mouth. Ace glared at her, and a small spark of flame was starting to appear at his fingertips, showing that he was starting to get angry with her words. Anything that could be related to those that he loved would never fail to trigger him. But alas, he controlled his temper, and just slapped the long sword away from him. Yuzu gave him a mocking smile and said, "Don't get angry now. It would be troublesome if you end up attracting more flies here before we could even leave this place. Remember, you're now a part of Yuzu, so think about the kingdom first before you think about yourself. If that cousin of mine knew that we were here, then that could be our end game. After all, if Doflamingo or anyone from the world government found out that two big shots from Yuzu were to be seen around Dressrosa, which was a part of the world government itself, all hell would break loose. If something were to happen, Naru would not be around here to solve the problem for them." Yuzu took the Yuzuki's words very seriously. Hence, the reason why she killed these rats. If it wasn't for Ace wandering around the place trying to locate a certain someone, they wouldn't be in this kind of situation in the first place. Counting 1 to 10 slowly in his head, Ace calmed himself and started to take off his cloak that had been splattered with blood because of that damn woman earlier. Once the piece of cloak was removed, the impressive sight of his naked upper body was revealed to the world as well as the familiar Whitebeard's tattoo displayed on his back. He then took out a shirt from where he kept it somewhere inside the available space of the cloak, and put it on. He didn't even bother to button up the shirt, and just let his body be hit with the cold air of Acacia. With the nature of his memoir no Mi, he wouldn't have to worry about catching a cold. Ace looked at Yuzu, who was keeping a lookout just in case there was a witness to what they were doing. He and the swordswoman didn't actually have a harmonious relationship between them due to the differences in their personality, but they were willing to work together because of Naru anyway. At first, he and Yuzu were supposed to follow Naru to the Fishman Island. Yuzu wanted to follow her because she considered herself to be the one responsible for protecting the leader, while Ace wanted to go there because the island was one of the islands that were protected under Whitebeard's flag before it was snatched away by Big Mom. While the crew had long been disbanded, Ace still considered himself to be a part of the crew and felt a sense of responsibility over the Fishman Island. But before they could even leave for their destination, Naru received news from who know where that Doflamingo was gathering a lot of powerful and well-known individuals from all over the world using his underground connections as Joker. According to her sources, the Shichibukai was going to host a battle competition with the Guragura no Mi as the prize for the winner. Needless to say, Ace was surprised to learn that Doflamingo somehow managed to get Whitebeard's devil fruit in his possession. He immediately abandoned his original intention to follow Naru, and expressed his desire to get the devil fruit for himself instead. He certainly didn't want the devil fruit to fall into the wrong hands, especially after considering the possibility of Blackbeard coming to Dressrosa to get the devil fruit for himself. Knowing that bastard's greedy nature, Ace had no doubt that he would be coming. With such a great treasure within his reach, why wouldn't he come here, right? After all, the Guragura no Mi itself was capable of destroying the world. He absolutely refused to let it fall into Marshal Dietrich's dirty hands. So when Naru granted him the permission to join the battle competition but under the condition of not letting himself be exposed until she arrived, he immediately agreed. But he didn't expect that she would let this bloodthirsty woman to come along with him. Yuzu herself wasn't that willing to go with him either, especially when she had to step into Doflamingo's territory. She didn't even care if this kingdom was once originally ruled by her ancestors before the throne was passed to another royal family. She absolutely refused to have anything to do with the world government at all. And when she found out later that the stinky man Hyde actually replaced her position to follow Naru to the Fishman Island, Yuzu was more than just annoyed. But when she was told by Naru herself that she was the only one that could be trusted to accompany Ace to Dressrosa due to her connection with Doflamingo, she agreed in the end. Albeit reluctantly. Which led them to be in this current situation, in the dark, bloodied alley of Acacia in Dressrosa. They had been here for a couple of weeks now, and so far they hadn't done anything to get her dear cousin's attention to themselves. Except for tonight. Right now, they were just done dealing with the low-ranking men of Doflamingo who were unfortunate enough to catch them lurking around the streets suspiciously. And because they didn't bother to cover their faces, they were instantly recognized as the Gold Ace and Yuzu, or known to the rest of the world as Don Quixote Dorothy from the wanted posters that had been spread all across the kingdom. Thinking that it would be troublesome if they were to be discovered before the day of the tournament, or before Naru arrived, the duo immediately went to settle them. While Ace simply used his brute strength, Yuzu on the other hand was hellbent on killing all of them before one of them could spread the words about them being here, much to Ace's displeasure because he wasn't actually that fond of killing unless he had to. Ever since the payback war that took the lives of many of his comrades, Ace was starting to hate the smell of blood. "Well, it looks like it's all clear now," he heard Yuzu said. "Let's get the hell out of here, before someone else comes." She was about to walk away, when Ace's sudden question stopped her in her tracks. "Why did you choose to follow my sister?" She turned around and looked at Ace with raised eyebrows. "Why the sudden interest?" Ace shrugged his shoulders. "I was just wondering. Based on your personality alone, I didn't think that you two could get along really well." Yuzu gave him a smirk, but she said nothing. As time passed, Ace was starting to get irritated by her stare. Honestly, he was just asking because he was trying to get a better understanding of her. Even though they didn't get along, that didn't mean that he didn't acknowledge her as a good loyal friend of his sister. Plus, he was also a part of the kingdom like she had claimed earlier. So it didn't hurt to try and form a friendship with the former world noble. Just as when he thought that the woman would not say anything, he was surprised when she opened her mouth to answer his question. It was because I know something that you don't. Huh? Ace stared at her in confusion, wondering what she was talking about. Kidding. She looked at him, amused. Then she continued to tease him by saying it was because fate led me to her. While Ace was trying to make sense of her vague answer, Yuzu was recalling the words uttered by someone that she knew from her memories. Such words shouldn't be said by someone of your status. An 11-year-old Dorothy said to the person sitting next to her. She didn't even care that this person was someone with an extremely important identity in Mary Geos, or the fact that she was being stared with such a hateful gaze by the others for being able to speak with this person. Dorothy didn't care. But she did care about her life. After all, once someone found out that this person was talking about something taboo with her, the one who would be punished at the end of the day would be her alone. She was probably going to be accused of a crime that she didn't even commit. Between her and this person, she was just a small bird that could be killed and replaced anytime they wanted. She bore no importance to the rest of the people in this god-forsaken place at all. The reason why I'm saying this is because the person paused for a while and said, "You possess the gaze of someone who is not willing to be locked here." Then the person turned to stare at the direction of where the ocean was and said, "And that place is the perfect place for someone like you." Because of that person's words, Yuzu actually did such a bold move by running away from her life 12 years ago. At that time, she was attending a gathering between the nobles at a certain kingdom, and that was when she escaped. As soon as she escaped from such a suffocating place, she then saw a young girl around her age who slept contentedly underneath a tall tree with a big fox as her pillow. And when that young girl opened her eyes, young Dorothy was instantly mesmerized. She knew right then and there that she had to follow this girl no matter what. "Who are you?" the girl asked. Dorothy daringly met her gazes without a flinch and said without a hint of hesitation, "You may call me Yuzu." And that was how she met Monkey D. Nara. At that time, they were only 12 and Nara had just arrived in the Grand Line. Ace gave up in trying to communicate with the woman who seemed to be too immersed in her own thoughts. When he was about to snap her back to reality so that they could leave this place before someone else came, he was surprised when her pupils suddenly moved and her eyes were staring sharply behind him. "I can sense you," she said coldly, with her trademark bloodthirsty grin started to form on her face. "Reveal yourself." Ace narrowed his eyes and turned his body around to stare at the dark alley across them. With his Kenbunchu Kahaki, he could sense that someone was indeed there, watching them in the darkness. Clenching his fist that was suddenly covered in flame, he shot the flame straight to where he felt the presence at, and the dark alley was instantly illuminated with the ball of flame for a moment. Even though it was only for a short moment, both Ace and Yuzu definitely saw a figure who was wearing a black cape with a hood that covered their face. Based on the body shape alone, not to mention that they could definitely see the long dress underneath the cape, it was no doubt a woman. The mysterious woman then turned her body around and ran away. Before Ace could say anything to Yuzu, the brown-haired woman had already left his side to chase after the person with her already unsheathed sword that was gleaming with the light reflected from the moon. Ace cursed under his breath and followed after them. Not long after that, he arrived in what looked like the dead end of the alley. He saw the two stood facing each other. Yuzu had her sword pointed at the woman, and unlike earlier, the cape that the woman was wearing before was discarded on the ground near Yuzu's feet with a huge tear on it. He had no doubt that Yuzu was the one responsible for it. But now that the cape was out of the way, the identity of their stalker was also revealed. The woman was tall, and she had long wavy dark hair that reached the middle of her back. She wore the typical kind of dress that women of Dressrosa always wore, and a pair of high heels. Her skin was slightly dark, but nobody could deny that she was one beautiful woman with a great figure. However, her beauty didn't faze Ace, who was focused on Yuzu, who seemed to know the other woman as what he could figure out based on the knowing smile that also had a hint of mocking on her face. Well. Yuzu swung her sword and placed it over her shoulder in such an arrogant manner, as if she was a bandit trying to scare off a poor defenseless woman. Ace reached her side and looked between the two women in confusion. "You know her?" "Of course," Yuzu admitted. I'm surprised you didn't know about this person. After all, she's quite famous. Who? Yuzu answered his question by asking the woman, aren't you here on behalf of Doflamingo, Violet? Hearing the Shichibukai's name, Ace suddenly became alert, and the way he looked at Violet changed from confusion to wariness real quick. An enemy? Did she purposely lure them here? An ambush? Was Doflamingo going to appear and attack them? Feeling tense, Ace immediately clenched his fists, and flames started to cover his whole hands. Yuzu continued, or should I call you by your real name as the former princess of Dressrosa, Miss Viola? With her identity had been revealed, Viola calmly met the eyes of Yuzu and Ace, who seemed ready to attack her if she did even one wrong move. Ace only hoped that Naru would be here as soon as possible so that he wouldn't have to be stuck with the violent Yuzu anymore. Back in Fishman Island. In this kingdom, there were many great places here that became famous attraction spots for visitors. One of them being the infamous Mermaid Cafe, where most of the workers here were young beautiful mermaids such as Kami. The cafe's owner was also someone who was quite well known among the locals here. She was none other than Arlong's younger sister, whose name was Shirley. Unlike her big brother, Shirley wasn't someone who would cause unnecessary troubles. But her being related to Arlong wasn't the reason why she was famous in the kingdom in the first place. In fact, it was more because she had this ability to see the future through her crystal ball. Her ability was proven when her predictions about the Great Pirate Era and the birth of Princess Shirahoshi actually came true. Shirley was also a good friend of Naru, who was now sitting comfortably on the sofa opposite the mermaid. You sure you're okay? Naru asked as she stared at the bandages that were covering the mermaid's whole left shoulder. Actually, Shirley was the unfortunate mermaid that was shot by that despicable Hody earlier. Thankfully her wound wasn't that critical. It hurts, of course, but I won't die that easily from this wound alone, Shirley answered. Well, that's good then. Naru nodded and accepted her answer. The mermaid raised her eyebrow in question as she asked, what about you? Aren't you supposed to be busy handling your matters? I heard that you still keep that sea serpent alive. Why? Jinbe and Hody are working together to sort out the problems. They should be done with their work by now, Naru answered. About the sea serpent, it wasn't that bad actually. Just trust me on this, okay? Well, since it's you, I don't see the problem, Shirley said as she tried to shrug her shoulders but winced when she felt pain instead. But she ignored the pain and said, I saw that the future of this island is as bright as the sun, so I don't think there would be any problem in the future. Especially not when there is you on our side. Saw the future? You used that crystal ball thingy again? Shirley gave her human friend a teasing smile. Why? Do you want me to predict your future? Naru gave her a scowl. Did you know? Because of your so-called prediction, the others wouldn't stop talking about my love life. Not like she had one in the first place. Shirley's response was to laugh at her words, causing her scowl to deepen even more. 8 years ago, she came to this island with the help of the Whitebird pirates, bringing along the many fishmen and merfolks that she rescued from the world nobles. At that time, she was only 16 and Shirahoshi was only 10. The people of the Fishman Island were also quite wary and not that friendly to humans, especially after what happened to Fisher Tiger and Queen Odoheim. When they saw that their brothers and sisters who had been missing for quite some time had suddenly appeared looking like they had seen hell, needless to say that they were quite furious once they found out what truly happened to these poor people. They knew that once they had been caught by humans, they would surely be treated with little to no humanity, which was actually true. They were angry and their hatred started to grow even more. But when they looked at the proud Whitebeard who stood next to a female human that turned out to be the one that rescued their brothers and sisters, the people of Fishman Island had mixed feelings and didn't know how to react about the whole thing. However, they still knew how to differentiate between good and bad, and they also knew how to be grateful and thankful. Later, when they found out that there were those among the returned people who were willing to leave their current home and live above the sea with the person who had saved them from their darkest time, it caused many different reactions from the locals. Some were hesitant, some were wary, and some supported their decision. Especially those who had been saved by the person herself, and witnessed with their own eyes how well she treated her people regardless of what race they came from. During those times that they lived on that island that was surrounded with whirlpools, there were no discrimination or even contempt in the humans' eyes. They didn't treat them badly, and they even shared their food with each other. Since they all experienced the same horror and were saved by the same person, they naturally understood each other and learned how to support one another. With their brothers and sisters' words, also with the help of Fukaboshi, who managed to clear away their doubt and hesitation, a beautiful seed of hope started to grow inside the heart of the people of the Fishman Island. And when Shirley herself had predicted that the future of their island was as bright as the sun that they longed for, the people were willing to put their trust on those who wanted to live on the surface, and also the human girl that called herself the Yuzukage. And who would have thought that 8 years later, she really would bring great changes to their race? And also, 8 years ago, Shirley, who wanted to form a friendship with Nara, thought that it would be funny to say that she would have a strong fate with someone as her future's prediction. Hyde and others immediately believed in her words and quickly assumed that the someone would be a guy. And ever since then, those fools really wouldn't shut up about her non-existent love life. Prediction, my ass? Nara grumbled. Those were just empty words coming from the big mermaid's mouth. Nara knew damn well Shirley did no such thing as predicting her future love life. And the most annoying thing was that Yuzu and the others were quick to believe in the mermaid's words. You seem to be disappointed, Shirley commented with an amused smile. Do I look like I'm disappointed? Nara glared at the smiling Shirley. Oh, how she wished she could just wipe off the smile on the mermaid's face, because she was really starting to feel that all of the teasings that she got were very annoying. Seeing the look of her friend, Shirley quit her teasing and said, Don't be like that. What if I told you that I really did predict your future? A look of doubt was her only response, causing the mermaid to chuckle. Well, think. Aren't you getting too comfortable with anyone these days? Nara blinked, and an image of a certain red-haired man suddenly came across her mind. Well, there is someone, I guess. While she and the captain of the red-hair pirates didn't meet that often, it could be said that she was actually quite comfortable with the redhead's presence, especially after he had helped her about Ace's case. Nara recalled that sometimes he'd drop by her island just to have a chat and a drink with her. And because she actually liked his company, Nara always looked forward to their next meeting. But that was only because she considered him to be a good friend of hers, she thought to herself confidently. Once, Hyde gave a playful remark about how she actually preferred an old man like Shanks as her type, which later triggered Ace, who suddenly found the Yonko to be somewhat of an eyesore to him. Even Yuzu started to look at Shanks with a concealed hostility in her eyes every time the man came to visit. Both Ace and Yuzu didn't actually have a good relationship with each other, but those two actually managed to be in the same boat when it came to her. Especially when Shanks was around, and they bluntly said to his face that he and Nara didn't look good together. Instead of feeling flustered or offended, Shanks just broke into a fit of laughter. He even teased them by placing his lone arm around her shoulders and playfully asked her if they truly didn't look good together. Nara also found the situation to be quite funny, especially when there was nothing actually going on between them. And although she was amused with Ace and Yuzu's reaction, she had to disagree with Hyde's remark about how she preferred an old man like Shank. Not like Shanks wasn't a fine man, but that besides the point. But that was just because Nara never considered Shanks to be someone who was older than her. Due to her mentality, she considered the Yonko to be someone of the same age as her. She didn't actually know how old Shanks was, but they should be around the same age if she combined her ages in her 2 lifetimes. So yeah, they were just friends. While Nara was still thinking of her supposed friendship with Shanks, Shirley, who had been observing the blue-eyed woman closely, just chuckled softly before she moved over to where she placed her crystal ball. Why don't I have a little bit of a glimpse of that future of yours? Who knows, maybe I could see the one destined for you. What? Before Nara could give a proper reaction, Shirley had already placed her hand above the crystal ball. Nara just sighed and just let the mermaid do whatever she wanted. In any case, it wouldn't hurt to let Shirley predict her future, so she just sat back and quietly observed. She watched as Shirley made a motion with her hands, and the crystal ball started to glow. At first, Shirley was still smiling, but then her expression changed. Her smile started to drop, and she was frowning at whatever it was she was seeing through her crystal ball. As time passed, she was starting to sweat and her hands were trembling. Naru, who noticed that there was definitely something wrong with her friend, immediately rushed to her side. She was about to touch the mermaid and snap her out of it, but worried if her action would cause a negative effect to the fortune teller instead. So she stood next to her and called out her name worriedly. "Shirley! What's wrong?" The mermaid made no indication that she even heard of her question. Or rather, she was just too focused on what she was seeing to really pay attention to her surroundings. Through her crystal ball, she saw a vague silhouette of what looked like a female human crouching down while she had her hands overhead, trembling. There was only darkness around her that slowly started to spread from her feet to her entire body. The more she was covered by the darkness, the harder she trembled. Then, out of nowhere, a terrifying creature suddenly appeared from behind the woman before swallowing the woman in one go. The next thing that she saw was the same figure, but this time she was kneeling on what Shirley recognized to be the vast ocean. Weirdly enough, the woman that she saw was actually kneeling on the surface of the ocean before the same terrifying creature appeared from right above her, with its hand outstretched towards the woman and pushed her into the ocean. "Shirley!" Then she came back into reality. Shirley moved away from the crystal ball and gasped for air as she tried to calm herself. Feeling like she had no energy left, Shirley allowed herself to fall down to the floor, trying to regain her senses. And when she did, she saw Naru's worried face next to her, asking her what was wrong, if she was okay, and what bad things she even saw. When she recalled back to what she had seen, her already pale face turned even paler. Because the figure that she was her friend right here. And the creature who kept on trying to kill her was the creature that Naru herself called partner, the QB. Maybe because she didn't know the meaning behind her visions, or maybe she was still dazed. But the thing that she ended up saying was, "I saw a creature with 9 tails. And it was trying to kill you." In the end, Naru left the Mermaid Cafe with a doubtful and troubled heart. Although her feet were carrying her to her next destination, her mind was somewhere else. In fact, she was still thinking about Shirley's words that refused to leave her head. She and Kurama? Fighting to death? What kind of bullshit was that? Naru couldn't help but to feel somewhat doubtful over Shirley's words, thinking whether the mermaid was fooling her or not. But she knew that Shirley wasn't lying, which meant that she truly saw the vision of her and Kurama fighting against each other. But for what? At the same time, Naru couldn't help but to think, what if her prediction truly came true? After all of her previous predictions were proven to be right when they all happened according to what she said. But she and Kurama had been getting along quite well for the past 24 years, and never once had they ever had a serious fight between them. There was absolutely no reason for them to fight at all. Sure, they always bickered, but not that serious to the point where they would be resorting to a physical fight like Shirley had described. So when the mermaid was explaining to her what she saw, Naru was doubtful. Maybe Shirley was mistaken. Being the one who could hear her thoughts, Kurama decided to speak. "What are you doing thinking so hard about that?" Naru stopped in her tracks and replied, "Kurama? If I ever make you feel upset or something, you will tell me, right?" He snorted at her question. "Of course I will. What kind of ridiculous question was that? I just want to make sure that I don't do anything stupid. So just tell me if you have something to say to me, so that I will be more conscious of your feelings, partner." Kurama simply grunted and gave her a small HN. "I'm just worried about what Shirley said earlier. You know she has this amazing ability to see the future, right? And I don't want that to happen. I don't want us to fight over something stupid when we can just settle it in a good way, you know? And of course I will also do the same if you upset me or anything. We're partners, right?" "Fool. Of course we are." Naru smiled. "Since we're partners, we shouldn't keep secrets from each other. This is a good way for us to avoid any possible conflict. Plus, it's not like I have any secrets to tell anyway. You know everything about me. It's because you're the one who isn't that good at keeping your own thoughts to yourself. In the name of Rikudo Sinin, I do not need to hear anything about what you think of a certain someone." Her face suddenly went blank, before it turned red. "Fool! I thought no such thing." "Whatever you say." Nera grumbled under her breath, and the conversation ended when Kurama didn't give any response anymore. Even though she was a little bit annoyed with his words, she just shook her head and smiled slightly. In fact, she was feeling a little bit better now because of his teasing. But while Nera was feeling better, Kurama was suffering from an excessive feeling of guilt over his Jinchuriki's words. He couldn't help but to have the desire to flick the mermaid away with his tails for talking about something stupid to Neru. Unlike Nera, who was doubtful, Kurama actually believed in the mermaid's words. That was because he knew more than anyone else about the possibility of him fighting against Neru was actually quite high. Suddenly, the words and warnings of the others kept ringing in his ears, and that made him feel annoyed. But he was careful enough as to not alert his Jinchuriki over his changed moods. If she knew, Kurama grimaced, then she would definitely break. He didn't want that to happen. Frowning, he looked around the place, which was the current mindscape of his Jinchuriki. The sunny weather here, and the flowers blooming everywhere around him were the results of Nera's happiness ever since she was reborn. And that was a good thing. But now he wondered, for how long would this place last before it turned into that depressing sewer that he once lived in? He didn't know. And he didn't want to know. While Kurama was absorbed in his own thoughts, Nera continued on her way to the direction of where the sea forest was located. She was on her way to check upon the sea serpent, and going through the sea forest was the shortest route to get where the Sea King was currently at. But she didn't expect to catch a glimpse of someone familiar. With her sharp observation, she instantly recognized the person riding on top of a shark's back was none other than Nico Robin, and Megalo, who was the pet shark of Princess Shirahoshi. Nera then raised her hand and called out to her. The shark stopped when it recognized her voice. Robin also turned around, and Nera saw a tiny surprise in the older woman's eyes before she broke into a smile and waved at her. The shark then did a U-turn and headed towards her. "Are you going to the sea forest, Robin?" asked Nera as soon as they came closer to her. Robin seemed a little bit surprised, but she nodded anyway. "Yes." "How did you know? Are you going there too?" "Well, the route that you were taking was the one that would lead you to the sea forest eventually," Nera said. "I want to see the sea serpent first before I return back." "What about you?" "Jinbe said that there is a Poneglyph at the sea forest," Robin answered as she recalled the words said by the former Shichibukai after dropping the bomb about Ace and a certain devil fruit. "And since I am not that tired, I decided to have a look at what kind of Poneglyph that is being kept here." "I see." Nera nodded. Then Robin asked her if she wanted to go together, and Nera immediately agreed. On their way there, the two women didn't stay idle and quiet. Instead, Robin took the initiative to ask Nera about the history of this island. The blue-eyed woman was more than happy to tell her what she knew about the island, according to what Shirahoshi had told her before. A long time ago, before the existence of the current Fishman Island today, fishmen and merfolks used to live together as a whole tribe as they constantly moved from one place to another across the sea before they decided to settle down at one place. Back then, they didn't have any royalties or official leaders to lead them. Despite that, they still managed to get along harmoniously and lived together in peace. Their relationship with other sea creatures was also good. They got along well with not only the tamed and friendly sea creatures, but they were also on a friendly term with sea kings that they had encountered during their journeys across the sea. But that was probably because of one special mermaid that was said to be born with the ability to communicate with the sea's largest creatures. Her indescribable beauty, gentleness, friendliness, and her natural leadership quality were enough for her to be recognized as the one that shall lead them. Due to that, she was dubbed as the first ever mermaid princess. One day, the mermaid princess was said to have rescued a man from the world above, and a friendship was formed between them. Soon after that, a promise was made, and the mermaid followed the man back to the surface, and never to be seen again. Some said that she was killed by the humans, some argued that she merely fell in love and refused to leave the man's side, and some even speculated that the mermaid princess was involved in some kind of a war that later led her to be dubbed as the infamous Poseidon. Nera told Robin. Robin's heart was beating furiously as she listened to the words uttered by the person next to her. She then asked, which one do you think to be the most likely scenario that happened to the mermaid princess? Being involved in a war and immediately known as a dangerous weapon is the most likely event that happened 900 years ago. Don't you think so, Robin? Nereus said with a slight smile. Interested, Robin asked again. Why do you think so? Do you know anything more about Poseidon? Nereus shrugged her shoulders and said, well, I know what most people that are able to think would know. Plus, once you know some things and observe what happens around you carefully, you're bound to pick up some pieces and figure out some things. How could she even claim to have a widespread spy network if she couldn't even figure out something so obvious such as the world government's involvement and connection to the Void Century, and the infamous 3 ancient weapons that just happened to mysteriously disappear 900 years ago? The fact that the world government itself banned anyone from learning and researching what truly happened during the year 600 was truly suspicious to her. They even banned anyone from looking for the ancient weapons with the excuse that it could cause mass destruction once it fell into the wrong hands. But who would have expected that one of the legendary weapons itself was just a single mermaid who could talk to sea kings? After being told by Shirahoshi that she also possessed the same ability as the first mermaid princess, Nero casually mentioned it to King Neptune of what she was told. But King Neptune later ended up telling her that the first mermaid princess was supposed to be the Poseidon that everyone was looking for, much to Nero's surprise. She knew about the ancient weapons, but she wasn't that interested in looking for them. So when one actually appeared in front of her, Nero didn't actually mind or had different thoughts about Shirahoshi. For her, Shirahoshi was just Shirahoshi. But others would never treat the mermaid princess like a living person once her real identity was revealed to the world. And when that day came, Shirahoshi would have no choice but to use her own power and fight for herself. That was the reason why Nero encouraged her to use her power and stand up for herself. What was the point of having such power if she didn't want to use it to protect her beloved people? And Shirahoshi, as well as her family, understood her intention quite well. Hence, they didn't try to stop Shirahoshi when the mermaid came forward and confidently declared that she would save Noah using her own power earlier. Nero understood Shirahoshi's position more than anyone else. After all, wasn't she also a weapon that was supposed to be used in a battle once upon a time? To be honest, I actually found a Poneglyph at the Sky Island that we visited 2 years ago. It said that Poseidon would be here, but I didn't expect that it would truly be Princess Shirahoshi, said Robin. I'm actually quite impressed that you are able to read those stones. I wonder what they look like. Robin seemed surprised. You haven't seen one yet? Nero shook her head and said I'm not that interested in them. So I never actually bothered to look for one. Do you want to see the Poneglyph with me? Asked Robin. The one that she referred to was of course the one that she wanted to see now. Now it's okay. I need to settle the matter with the sea serpent first. Maybe later. Nero answered with an apologetic smile. Robin didn't push her and said that she understood. After that, the two went silent as Robin was busy thinking of what she had found out through the Poneglyphs that she had encountered so far. Nero, on the other hand, was just staring at Robin, who was too engrossed with her own thoughts before she asked something that took the older woman by surprise. Do you believe in reincarnation? Reincarnation? Robin blinked. Without waiting for Robin to give her answer, Nero said, I believe in reincarnation. The younger woman didn't say anything more of what she was talking about, and Robin didn't ask either. She assumed that Nero was simply referring to Shirahoshi, who was the reincarnation of the first mermaid princess. Thinking of the raw emotions that she had seen in the sea serpent's eyes as it stared at the mermaid princess, Robin was also starting to believe that reincarnation was possible. After all, Brook himself had risen from his death with the help of his devil fruit. Therefore, an unbelievable thing like reincarnation was indeed possible. Once they almost reached the sea forest, Nero used the item that was used to make bubbles and covered herself with a bubble dome before they entered the sea forest. First, Megalo dropped Robin off at where the Poneglyph was supposed to be, before it brought Nero away to where she wanted to go. As Robin watched their figures were getting smaller and smaller, she turned away and started to look for the Poneglyph. The whole area was covered with a bubble dome so that the water wouldn't get inside. After a couple of minutes of walking and searching using her devil fruit's ability, she then smiled once she found it. As she read the letters carved on the unbreakable stone, Robin's face changed from expectation to confusion. This This is a letter of apology. From someone named Joy Boy. Among the words, Robin read the last part out loud. There is no certainty of our next encounter, and that's why I asked Astra to give you this as my last message to you. Forgive me, and let's hope for our next encounter to be in the next life. May the goddess shine upon your people and bless the hearts of those who are waiting for the day to come. The day? Robin muttered under her breath. Just as when she thought that she would finally find the Poneglyph that would contain the information of what she was looking for, she was left with even more questions instead. What does it mean? Robin asked nobody as she traced her fingers across the carved words, thinking that whatever happened in the past was not as simple as just a war broke out. And the first mermaid princess, the person named Joy Boy, and Astra definitely had a connection to that event. But the question on Robin's head right now was who exactly were the individuals mentioned here? Who was Joy Boy? Who was Astra? What exactly happened 900 years ago? Also, at the same time, with Megalo as her transportation, they went through the bubble wall and made their way to the still-chained sea serpent. The soldiers of the Neptune army were stationed around it with their weapons pointed at it. Unlike the last time she had seen it, the sea serpent was now wide awake, and surprisingly, it didn't even bulge or show any sign of being distressed due to how it was treated. It just lay there with so many chains around its body as it stared at her with its glowing green eyes. Wearing a bubble suit, she walked and stood right in front of its face. Her tiny figure was as big as its pupil, and the soldiers panicked with how close she was to the Sea King. Yuzu Dano! One of them exclaimed worriedly. It's okay. It will not do anything to me, Nara said without even looking at them. Instead, she just stared directly into the eyes of the big creature. Right. Then, the same voice that she heard before appeared inside her head. Yes, I will not do any harm to you or anyone from this island. Nara smiled. Now tell me, who are you? And where did you come from? My name is Astra, and I am an old friend of the old mermaid princess of this island. Chapter 25, To the New World. On such a cold rainy night, it was surprisingly warm here in this small room. After all, it was simply just a tiny room with almost nothing but a single bed, a sofa, and a table next to the bed. There was also a single door that led to another room and a couple of windows on the wall on the right side of the bed. The only source of light that was used to brighten up the whole room was just a single burning candle that was placed on top of the table. Even though it was just one candle, it was still enough. There on the bed was a beautiful woman bearing a beautiful smile. Drops of sweat trickled down her forehead, and her face was as white as a ghost due to the exhaustion and pain that she could feel from all over her body, especially the lower part of her body. But despite her body's weak condition, anyone could see the overflowing happiness in her beautiful emerald eyes. Suddenly, the door that was connected to the next room was pushed open and the woman's loyal maid came in with a single bundle in her arms. My lady. The maid called out to her master weakly. When the woman in the bed landed her gaze on the bundle, her eyes brightened even more. However, when she noted the anxiousness on her maid's face, she became worried and alarmed instantly. Is everything all right? Her voice was somewhat hoarse and weak at the same time, but that was probably because she had been screaming non-stop for hours before she could successfully give birth to her first child. When she thought of the joy of finally being a mother, her pain and tiredness just didn't matter to her anymore. Come, bring her to me, she demanded softly as she reached out her arms, expecting her maid to hand over the baby to her right away. The maid, when she heard her lady's words, immediately dropped down to her knees and wept, startling the woman on the bed. My lady? The maid cried out. Staring wide-eyed at the weeping maid, she suddenly had a bad feeling. Concerned for her child in the maid's arms, she reached out her hands once again and said, What's wrong? Is there something wrong with her? Bring her to me. Quick! The maid seemed to be a little bit reluctant to do so, but considering her lady's feelings and the unfortunate child in her arms, she slowly rose to her feet as her tears fell down even more. My lady. The child. Eldest miss is no longer breathing. Knock. Knock. The sudden sound of the knocking door shattered her memories into pieces, and immediately brought her back into reality. Shaking her head to clear away the sad memories, she then kept away the book that she had been reading for the past couple of hours, or at least tried to, before signaling the person outside to enter. Not long after that, a middle-aged woman came in with her head slightly lowered. She closed the door before making her way to her master, who was sitting behind her desk, and gave a respectable bow as she should. The woman nodded, and without wasting any more time, her loyal maid opened her mouth and let out the words that spoke of the current affairs of the people and Mary Geos to her master. It wasn't much. It was just the usual daily report of what the other world nobles had been up to today. The things that she heard today were just the same as what she heard yesterday, and she was probably going to hear the same thing for the next day too. To be frank, she didn't actually want to know about what those narcissistic people had been doing, but here, not knowing anything was just the same as preparing for an early funeral. She had been living here for decades, so she knew that in order to survive, she had to be aware of her surroundings and also the people around her. Once the maid was done with her report, she asked, "Is that all?" "Yes, my lady." She nodded. Then her eyes gleamed with interest when she recalled one matter. "I recount that Lord Njosgard has been traveling to the kingdom of Yuzu these days. Any information about him?" The maid thought for a while before she answered, "None. It seems that Lord Njosgard is still enjoying his leisure time there." Envy flashed across her beautiful emerald eyes when she heard that. Anyone here in Mary Geos knew that Lord Njosgard of the Don Quixote family was on good terms with the leader of Yuzu for some reasons. Nobody knew why Monkey D. Nero would even let someone with the status of a world noble to set foot in her kingdom when she was the one who was so against the world government in the first place. And when the other world nobles tried to inquire from Lord Njosgard of how he was able to be on a good term with Yuzukage, the only thing that he said was that he had finally admitted his sins and that he had been acknowledged. Nobody knew what he meant by that. She remembered that Lord Njosgard was the typical scum of Mary Geos before he suddenly changed into a proper human being after being associated with the mermaid from the Ryugu kingdom. So, she didn't actually have a problem with him. And nobody here even dared to mess with him due to the unexpected friendship between him and the Yuzukage. If Lord Njosgard was truly on good terms with the Yuzukage, then the woman would probably do something drastic like blowing another part of their holy land if they messed with him. Though, most of them doubted that Monkey D. Nero would do such a thing just for someone who didn't even have a high position in his own clan. "I see." She nodded. The maid blinked her eyes as she just remembered about something and said, "My lady, I forgot to tell you this, but it seems like some of them are preparing to go to Yuzu too." She narrowed her eyes and suddenly banged her fist on the table, causing her maid to be surprised. "For what reason are they going there?" she demanded. The fierceness in her eyes was enough to say that she wasn't happy with the idea at all. "My apologies, but I have no idea, my lady." Her maid apologized as she lowered her body even more. "No, it's okay." The woman sighed and rubbed her temple as she felt the headache coming. While she wasn't sure as to why those people even wanted to go to Yuzu, she could guess the reason. They probably wanted to see Neru and made a connection with her just like how Lord Njosgard did. The only thing was that she didn't have any shred of good opinion of them, so she absolutely loathed the idea of them tarnishing Neru's place with their bad auras. "Is there any recent news of the Yuzukage?" she asked after a few moments of silence. Her maid shook her head. "None." She was about to ask another question, when a deep voice suddenly interrupted her. "If you want to know about Neru, you should have just called me." The unexpected voice caused the maid to instinctively grab the gun that she had hidden underneath her clothes before she turned her body around and pointed the gun to the person that managed to enter the room without anyone noticing. "A good reflex like always, Gracia," the man approved. He didn't even show any sense of panic when a gun was pointed at his face. When the maid whose name was revealed to be Gracia recognized the man, she immediately removed her gun away and bowed. "My apologies, my lord." "You." The woman seemed to be surprised at his sudden appearance, but then a bright smile adorned her face as she stood up and walked around her desk before throwing herself at the man. Despite the huge differences between their appearance, as the woman was wearing a beautiful dress befitting of her status while the man was simply wearing a worn-out dark cloak. Nobody could deny the harmonious aura that radiated from them. Dragon wrapped his arms around the woman and smiled. Due to his big muscular body, the woman looked quite petite and fragile in his arms. Seeing the two locked in an embrace, Gracia smiled knowingly, as she excused herself before she went to guard the door from outside like she had done so many times for the past 24 years. "You didn't tell me you would be coming so soon," she said as soon as they ended the hug. Dragon gazed at her with such a longing look that it made her feel a little bit bashful, as if she was still a young lady in love. While she was nearly in her 50s, she still looked like she was in her late 20s. It didn't matter, because for Dragon, she was still the same woman that he fell in love with at least 3 decades ago. Maria was her given name, and she was also the mother of his children. With her beautiful dark hair that was tied into a neat bun, and her pair of emerald green eyes, she could be said to be the older version of his daughter if it weren't for the rich emerald color of her eyes and the lack of the whiskers mark of his daughter. She took Dragon's large hand and brought him to sit next to her on the sofa. Frowning, she asked, "Is there something going on? I thought you said that you wouldn't be able to come for a few months. Is everything okay with the army?" "No, everything is okay," he assured her. "In fact, I just couldn't resist coming to see you." She couldn't help but to laugh softly. "Why?" "I just met Luffy." Her heart skipped and her body went stiff, clearly not expecting that. But she composed herself and asked after a moment of silence, "How is he?" His eyes then shone with pride as he said he has grown to be a good person. Dragon then proceeded to tell her of what he and their son had talked about. From their heart-to-heart talk, hearing Luffy calling him Dad, his favorite things, his dreams and goals in life, and even his childhood. The more Dragon talked about Luffy, the wider the smile on his face. While Dragon was happy, Maria couldn't help but to have mixed feelings as she listened to what he was saying. Even though she was glad and happy that Luffy grew up well, she also felt sad and guilty because she wasn't a part of his life for almost 2 decades and missed a lot of things about him. Not that Luffy was the only one that she was sorry to. Thinking of another person in her mind, she suppressed a longing in her heart, and told herself that she didn't have the right to feel this way when she was the one who decided to send them away first, thus abandoning her responsibility as a mother. And she was also aware that the 2 siblings weren't actually that curious or caring enough to know about her, even though she knew that they were aware of the fact that the woman who gave birth to them was still alive. To say that she wasn't hurt by that would be a lie. After all, she was still their mother, and just because she gave them away, it didn't mean that she didn't love them. No. It was only because she loved them too much and the lack of choice that she decided to send them away from her. It was too dangerous. Especially for Naru. Not even in her deathbed would she allow Naru to grow up here. As she thought about her daughter, she started to think of other matters too. Like how those people were starting to take notice of Naru. The fact that some of them even started to consider going to her land despite the supposed enmity between them, was something that should be worried about. Noticing the gloomy and deep look on the woman's face, Dragon placed his big hand on top of her small one and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing, it's just that." Maria pursed her lips and said, "I was just thinking about Naru." Dragon nodded and recalled that she and her maid were talking about Naru earlier. Naru is doing well. She's supposed to be at the Fishman Island now, trying to make an alliance with them. If she hasn't left that place yet, she and Luffy should have met by now. I see. Talking about Naru was always a sensitive topic for them. Especially for Maria, who still hadn't met her yet. At least Dragon had already been acknowledged as one of the parents, while she still had to stay in the dark and watch her silently. It had always been like that ever since Naru was born. But Maria's pupils shifted when she thought of something. Immediately she rose from her seat, surprising Dragon. Then she went back to her desk, opened the last drawer and took out a book that she was trying to read earlier before Gracia came. It was an old book, with a red cover. There was the word memoir written with such an elegant stroke in the middle of the cover. For a while, Maria didn't move away from her spot as she caressed the book carefully. As if she was afraid that it would suddenly break under her touch or something. Not that it actually could, since it was just an old book, not a glass. An old book that was written 800 years ago by her ancestor. The patriarch of her clan from hundreds of years ago wrote this book that contained his life journey from when he was a kid until he was old. Nothing interesting and nothing important. But only Maria knew that this book hid something that nobody could imagine. Even she herself didn't know what. All she knew was that this book was really important, and it shouldn't fall into someone else's hand. Ever since the olden days, this book had been passed down from its writer to the next generation, until it eventually landed in her possession. When her late mother gave her this book, Maria still remembered the words uttered by her mother before she died. "Don't you ever give this book to someone who isn't a part of our family. The secrets of this book can only be deciphered and known only to one person. Once that time comes, you will know." Now she knew. This book, to whom shall she give it to? Maria? Dragon went to her side with a slight concern on his face. Is there something wrong? Maria pursed her lips and just stared at him for a few moments, before she shook her head at him. Dragon? Naru. Do you think she is ready to know? He seemed surprised by her words, before understanding flashed across his eyes. Yes. Yes, she is. It had been 24 years, and Naru had always been the most matured and understanding child that he had ever seen. From accepting the absence of her parents, to being the one to raise Luffy and Ace since they were kids, to understanding the reasons why they had to be abandoned. And even managed to interact with her father normally as if he hadn't just abandoned her and her brother since they were babies. Even though his relationship with his daughter wasn't the best, he knew what kind of person she was. So yes, Dragon believed that Naru was ready to know more about herself that she herself didn't know of. With Dragon's simple answer, Maria sighed. Then she said she will be coming here soon. Dragon widened his eyes. What? Why? For this. She referred to the book. He looked at the book, and took it from her. Flipping through the pages carefully, he frowned in confusion. I see nothing special about this book. I know, she said, because this isn't meant for anyone else but her. Seeing the pointed look on her face, he connected the dots and figured out the situation himself. So this book isn't just a normal book and there should be hidden secrets in it? Is it because of her identity? She nodded. And you believe that Naru shall come here just for this book? She nodded again. Are you certain? Another nod. Dragon sighed. Maria, be honest with me. Did you perhaps use your power again? This time, she shook her head. No. This time it was Leah. An image of another person popped inside his head. Leah? She can use the same power as yours? Dragon, she is my successor. She stated simply. And as my successor, it is my duty to pass down my knowledge and skills to her, for she is the one who inherits my surname. Plus, she has been using her power ever since she awakened it. Maria wasn't just a simple world noble who lived extravagantly in Mary Geos. Unlike the others, she had a very important role here, and that was because of her identity as the descendant of the fallen kingdom. The only reason why the past allied kings didn't take her ancestor's life was because his family possessed a unique ability. So they spared his life so that he could continue his bloodline as they wanted to use his power for themselves. The thing was that only one person from each generation was able to use the power. In her generation, it was Maria. From her ancestor to her, they possessed what the people of Mary Geos described as the eyes of heaven. The chosen people of her clan were able to see the future. And a long time ago, there was one of her ancestors who foresaw the births of 3 kings with their own roles. The first king shall be the one to possess everything. Another shall take over the throne and rule the sea. And the other king shall be the ruler that unites the whole of humanity. The first one had come true. The first who appeared in the form of Gold Roger. He became the pirate king and possessed everything that included power, wealth, and fame. The whole Mary Geos knew that. And they were all aware that the other 2 would definitely appear one day. Maybe even soon. They didn't know who, but everyone was a suspect. Because they knew that those that had the potential of being the king were always those with the initial D in their names. With one of them being a certain Kage. Dragon, it is time, Maria said. The moment she's here, those people will definitely come for her. Perhaps all of her suppressed emotions were too much for her to handle. She dropped the book, and she grabbed his cloak desperately. You will be there to protect her, right? If she decides to go against us. You will be there to support her, right? Seeing her like this, with pale face, shaking pupils, trembling as she looked at him with uneasiness and desperation in her eyes, Dragon felt like his heart was in pain. He knew that she was like this because she had been trying to carry the burden for years alone in this lonely cage. And he couldn't even do anything but to let her struggle to protect her children from the enemies with her own ways. But now that their children were all grown up, they didn't have to worry anymore. She could stop worrying about them now. And he too, he could finally free her from her cage, just like what he promised her years ago. They just needed a little more time. They just had to wait until Nair herself came to them, to Maria, to seek an answer. And that would be soon, just like what Leah had seen in her visions. Pulling her into his embrace, he said softly, Maria, everything that I have done, I did it all for our family. While it was true that I originally tried to rebel because of my role in this world, but after knowing that everything is destined, I chose to do this for you, for us, for our entire family. Maria's body trembled even more, and he could also hear a soft sniffle from her. The only thing that he could do was to stroke her head in a comforting manner, as he said, so don't worry, whatever our daughter chooses to do in the future, the entire army shall be the first one to support her from behind. This time, Dragon smiled proudly. Plus, our daughter is so great, I think that she doesn't even need us to be there for her. It was supposed to be a joke to cheer her up, but Maria went still in his embrace. She didn't say anything for a long time, worrying Dragon, who thought that he had said something wrong. After a while, her soft voice murmured quietly, Dragon, you do know that once her eyes turned blue 24 years ago, she is no longer our daughter? She does not belong to us anymore. And Dragon's heart broke. However, his expression didn't change. Instead, he kissed the top of her head and said, what are you talking about? No matter what happened in the past, she will always be our daughter. And Maria was sad yet again. She thought that tonight, she would never be able to have a good night rest, as she knew that the moment her eyes were closed, she would be haunted by the ghost of the past once again. Back to Fishman Island. In the throne room, a discussion was currently being carried out between Naru, King Neptune, and Jinbe. All three of them displayed such a serious look on their faces as they discussed what shall be done to the defeated criminals. After a long talk between the three of them, King Neptune had finally decided on the most suitable actions that could be taken. First, based on Jinbe's reports after the interrogation yesterday and Naru's advice, King Neptune decided to free the captured pirates that Hody had forced to join his crew, which most of them were humans. Since they were also Hody's victims, King Neptune didn't have the intention to punish them at all, despite them being pirates. Fishman Island itself was a place where pirates would stop by if they wanted to reach the second half of the Grand Line. Therefore, there was no point in keeping them here since pirates would always come here anyway. As for the original members of the new Fishman Pirates, and the Flying Pirates, King Neptune didn't feel like letting them off that easily since they were the ones who were mostly responsible for the destruction in his kingdom, and also the death of some of his citizens. However, King Neptune was benevolent, and he agreed to punish them by making them do community services for as long as he wanted them to in exchange for their freedom. It was either that, or rot in the prison forever. And by making them do community services, it could also appease the citizens' anger, and help them to rebuild back the kingdom. Due to what happened in the past, King Neptune was actually quite upset with Hody since he was the one who killed his wife in the first place. It would be a lie if he said that he didn't have the intention to kill that bastard in order to avenge his wife. After all, even though he had already moved on, he was also deceived for years. Hody's revelation that he was the true killer of his wife just opened King Neptune's old wounds. But then he changed his mind once he witnessed what happened to Hody and his closest officers. Thanks to Hody and Jinbe, they managed to squeeze out a lot of information from the pirates. The situation was actually that the new Fishman pirates had been mass-producing a kind of pill that could give them a boost of strength. The average members didn't know the origin of the pill, but they knew that Hody was the one responsible for obtaining it. After the pill was mass-produced, Hody then gave each one of them a pill. At first they were quite wary, but later, once they had tasted the pleasure of getting a sudden boost of energy, they were thrilled and more than happy to get involved in the process of mass-producing the pill. Who wouldn't want something that could make them strong without much effort anyway? Plus, Hody always gave those whom he favored an extra pill, much to the crew's delight. Energy steroid was what they called it. After the criminal's confession, Hyde and Jinbe immediately concluded that the pill was just a drug. Among them, there were also those who had shown the symptoms of being addicted to the pills. After the interrogation, Jinbe and Hyde went to the former Fishman district, which was the ship that had been carried by the Sea Kings to the Sea Forest, and found many boxes full of those energy steroids. And when those pills were presented before King Neptune, he was enraged. That was because the so-called energy steroid was actually the national treasure that was supposed to be kept inside the Tamatobako box. The fuming King Neptune then went to the treasure room to check upon the box, only to see that there was nothing in it. It seemed that before fleeing away from the kingdom, Hody even stole the national treasure and used it for his own selfish desire. With how much of those pills that he had in his possession, no wonder he was so confident to attack the kingdom. How infuriating! After that, King Neptune along with Naru and Jinbe went to the prison upon getting a report that something unexpected happened to Hody and his closest subordinates. When they arrived, they were shocked to see that Hody and his group had now turned into a group of old geezers in just one day. Since Hody and his officers were the ones that had consumed the most energy steroid unlike the average members, it seemed that they now had to bear the brunt of the pill's side effects. They aged faster and became fragile old men that would probably die soon. Because of what happened to Hody, King Neptune decided that he would not do anything to them. For him, losing decades of their lives was a proper punishment for people like them. After all, based on their appearances alone, he believed that Hody wouldn't last long anyway. As for the rest of the energy steroids, knowing that they were dangerous, King Neptune wanted them to be destroyed completely. He didn't even care if those pills were supposed to be the kingdom's national treasure, but to him, the energy steroids were just another dangerous weapon that shouldn't fall in another wrong person's hands. Plus, he didn't actually know if Hody himself had done something to the original pills and now had become something else. He didn't want to risk anything just because of those pills. Naru and Jinbe naturally agreed. Then we'll just follow your arrangements, Neptune Dano, Naru said. King Neptune nodded. About Vanderdecken. Naru gave him a small smile and said, I don't think we have to worry about him anymore. What do you mean? Vanderdecken is a devil fruit user, she explained. And just like any other devil fruit users out there, his weakness is the seawater. King Neptune nodded in understanding, obviously pleased with the circumstance. Losing at the hand of Fukaboshi, Vanderdecken was then swept away by the current of the ocean to who know where. Since he was a devil fruit user, it was his fate to sink like rock. He was also a fishman, which meant that he was most likely to still be alive at the moment. Or he could be dead, eaten by a sea king, or get crushed by something else, nobody knew. But what they knew was that Shirahoshi was finally free from his evil clutches. The princess wouldn't have to worry about some weapons flying at her anymore. Speaking of Shirahoshi, Naru's thought immediately went back to the conversation that she had with the sea serpent yesterday. When the sea serpent introduced himself as the old friend of the first mermaid princess, Naru was honestly surprised. Based on his words, the sea serpent had been around the sea ever since the era of the first mermaid princess, which was 900 hundreds ago. According to Astra, he was only a young sea king when he first met the mermaid princess. When Naru asked about her, the sea serpent was silent for a while with a glint of confusion in his eyes. He then said that he didn't remember everything that happened, but he remembered that he was there when the man asked him to return back to this island and deliver a message to the mermaid princess. But when he arrived, the mermaid princess was nowhere to be seen. She said that she would return home, but she didn't. While she was curious to know what the heck actually happened to the past mermaid princess, in the end she didn't ask much. Because she could sense that the sea serpent wouldn't say anything. So she asked about the man that he mentioned before. He was the one who was saved by her. She helped him, a man from the surface. He was there when a country was ruined, and she saved him again. That was what he said. When the sea serpent seemed like he didn't want to say more of the matter, Naru ordered for him to be released the next day, which shocked the other soldiers. She merely assured them that the sea serpent wouldn't do anything. Trusting her, they released him afterwards, which was a few hours ago. She even brought the entire Ryugu family including Shirahoshi when the sea serpent was released. Everyone trusted Naru. So when she said that the sea serpent was good, they believed in her words. The good thing about the sea serpent was that he was actually able to communicate with anyone. Just like telepathic communication. Thus, the Ryugu family was more than happy when they learned that the Sea King was actually an old friend of the first mermaid princess. Especially Shirahoshi. The sea serpent too, he looked so happy when the current mermaid princess was so friendly with him. After that, Shirahoshi chose to stay with the sea serpent to learn more about the previous mermaid princess, especially about the ability that they both possessed. But the sea serpent mentioned that he knew nothing of the mermaid princess other than the fact that she was the only one who could speak to other sea kings. Currently, Shirahoshi was probably spending time together with Astra now. Since she woke up this morning, the mermaid couldn't wait to explore outside of the island now that everything was okay. Of course, there were also some of the soldiers to keep her safe. Even Luffy and the rest of his crew were having fun with the mermaid princess and Astra. One thing that surprised her was when Robin asked the sea serpent if he was the one who brought the Poneglyph to the sea forest from a man named Joy Boy. This was after Shirahoshi introduced the sea serpent as Astra. With King Neptune's permission, Robin talked about the Poneglyph that she saw yesterday. The sea serpent admitted that he was the one who brought the unknown stone to the sea forest. He claimed that it was a message from Joy Boy to the first mermaid princess. So when Robin asked whether he knew about anything else, Astra claimed that he was still a youngling at that time. Therefore he didn't quite understand or know anything about the affairs that the mermaid princess went through at the surface. But he did say that he was there when the other mature sea kings were seen bringing a big ship underwater. King Neptune said that the big ship was probably Noah, even though nobody knew why the ship was even brought here. Naren knew that the sea serpent wasn't lying, so she confirmed his words for everyone. After that, King Neptune brought Naru and Jinbe to the throne room where they discussed their current topic. "What is your plan after this, Naradano?" asked King Neptune. "Now that the matters here are settled, I'll be leaving the island tomorrow with my brother and his crew," she answered. This morning, when Luffy asked her whether she would be seeing Ace and Dressrosa, she said yes. Luffy immediately expressed his desire to follow her, which to her was not a problem at all. Since the captain had decided, the crew didn't object to his decision. So Naru and the Straw Hats would be leaving this place tomorrow to see Ace and Dressrosa. The big merman nodded. "I see. Shirahoshi would be sad to know that you're leaving soon. One day, I will bring her along to visit my kingdom," she said. King Neptune released a boisterous laugh and said, "Since it's Naradano who said it, then I don't have to worry anymore." Naru just smiled and looked at the silent Jinbe beside her. "What about you, Jinbe? I heard that Luffy has offered you to join his crew again." Jinbe chuckled. "Yes. But you know my situation, Narasan. As a captain myself, I can't just join another crew when my own crew is in the hands of Big Mom." Jinbe was the current captain of the Sun Pirates. After the death of Fisher Tiger, Jinbe took over what was left of the Sun Pirates and protected the crew by becoming a Shichibukai. 2 years ago, he rebelled and stood on Whitebeard's side, and that caused him to lose his position and the protection over his crew. Not that he regretted his action, but he was still worried nonetheless. To protect his crew, Jinbe had to join Big Mom, and now his crew was in the Yonko's territory. After the spread of Whitebeard's death, many took advantage by taking over his territories. Like everyone else, Big Mom wasn't an exception either. She immediately sent a representative to the Fishman Island and claimed that the island was then under her protection. It was done just like that, without some sort of a discussion or agreement from both parties. Since she was a Yonko, King Neptune was afraid that she would attack the kingdom if he declined, so he just went along with it. In return for her protection, the Fishman Island had to send many candies that they produced to her. Every month, some people from her side would come and demand candies, or else Big Mom would do something to the island. In other words, they were blackmailed to join her force. This was before Nera decided to get involved. It wasn't until a while ago that Nera decided to go along with her plan to unite Yuzu and the Fishman Island. First, she sent her own representative to Fishman Island and expressed her intention to form an alliance. It was stated in the contract that she would help them and be their support. With her as their backer, they wouldn't have to worry about going to the surface. Naturally, King Neptune was more than happy to agree, but alas, he was worried of Big Mom's reaction. However, after Fukaboshi mentioned that there wasn't any agreement between him and Big Mom anyway, they shouldn't be this scared. After being assured by Jinbe, who claimed that Big Mom wouldn't dare to do anything if it was Naru, King Neptune agreed. After getting overwhelming support from the people of both kingdoms, Naru brought Hyde along with some of Merfolk's and Fishman's citizens with her. The locals knew of Naru as the savior of their brothers and sisters that had been enslaved before, so they welcomed and received her warmly. The alliance was agreed and Big Mom's flags were replaced with Yuzu flags. When the people from Big Mom's side came, Naru had already declared that the Fishman Island was now under her protection. By now, Charlotte Linland should have received the news from her people. But the fact that there wasn't any news coming from her side, it was safe to say that the Yonko didn't dare to do anything. Not that Naru cared about her. As for Jinbe, even though he was a captain of his crew and said crew was now in Big Mom's territory, nobody knew that Jinbe was actually in the Fishman Island all these times. The locals also helped by hiding his whereabouts. Even though he was a criminal, the locals didn't treat him differently. At the same time, he also commanded and trained the Neptune army, along with his own personal squad, which was known as the Elite Squad when he was still a soldier himself years ago. Since nobody knew that Jinbe was actually hiding at the sea forest, his crew was still safe. Or else, he would have gotten a call from Big Mom herself about the possible demise of his crew once the news of Naru stealing her territory reached her ears. The reason why Jinbe rejected Luffy's offer to join his crew was precisely because he didn't want to risk the safety of his own crew. Big Mom is certainly a big problem for you, Naru said. Jinbe shook his head. Since it was me who looked for her first, then the least that I should do is fulfill my responsibility as a captain. Naru didn't comment on that. Instead, she looked back to the memories of when she had a conflict with Big Mom. A few years back, when Yuzu was still new, Naru as the mysterious Yuzukage became popular, and many strong pirate crews wanted her to join their crew. One of them being Big Mom herself. To coax her into joining them, Naru was promised immense wealth, power, and fame. However, Naru rejected all of the invitations, including Big Mom's, which later angered the Yonko. At that time, Yuzu's defense wasn't as good as it was now. Therefore, it was easy for some people with high abilities to sneak into the kingdom and proceed to kidnap one of the people as a warning for Naru. The unlucky one to be kidnapped just happened to be the weak Kana, who was only 6 years old at that time. Knowing that his adopted daughter was kidnapped, Barlow was enraged. But he knew that he alone was not enough to go against the Yonko. And that was when he put aside his pride and dropped down to his knees in front of Naru as he begged her to save his daughter. He knew that his request was a selfish one, especially when she had just saved him and his daughter from slavery, and now he even wanted her to go and risk her life against the Yonko just to save one little kid. Yuzu and Hyde were quite dissatisfied with Barlow, since both thought that Naru owed him nothing. Therefore, she wasn't obligated to save his daughter at all. However, to their surprise, Naru actually agreed without any hesitation, with the excuse that she was also upset that there were some people who were brave enough to kidnap someone who was under her protection. And just like that, Naru activated her god mode, as what they called it, and flew away straight to the Whole Cake Island, and confronted Big Mom face to face. Seeing her, Big Mom was happy and thought that Naru was there to join her crew. But Naru blatantly refused her offer, before she demanded the Yonko to hand over Kana. Of course, the Big Mom pirates wouldn't just let Naru get what she wanted after disrespecting Big Mom like that. So they fought. However, they didn't go all out. At first Naru was underestimated, but in the end she managed to stop those people from attacking her once she used her killing intent and her raw chakra to intimidate them. While the others were intimidated by her aura, Big Mom was an exception. After all, she was a Yonko, and she didn't just get the title for nothing. Instead of feeling intimidated, Big Mom was impressed and she wanted Naru, who was in her Yuzukage persona, to join her even more. She even promised Naru a high position in her crew which was second only to her, which shocked everyone greatly. Being someone who didn't want to be used, Naru refused once again and even declared that she would never serve anyone. Her response agitated the Yonko, who immediately commanded her people to attack Naru. However, before they could even do anything, Naru's entire body glowed in bright light as she released a great wave of terrifying killing intent that was mixed with Kurama's evil presence, which caused a lot of those with low mentality and weak will to pass out. Then, multiple replicas of herself appeared. Following the boss, all of them had a big-ass Rasen shuriken that had been upgraded. Her next action caused everyone to fear her even more, and this time even Big Mom became wary. Naru decided to throw her Rasen shuriken to a nearby island that she knew didn't have anyone there, and the island immediately exploded when her attack reached it. She then arrogantly claimed that she could make another 1,000 of her clones, and could still make more if she wanted to destroy Big Mom's territory. Because of her threatening them, nobody dared to move as one of her clones went to retrieve an unconscious but safe Kana before leaving without any words. The Yuzukage's confrontation with Big Mom didn't go unnoticed by the public. The exact details were not discussed, but everyone with wide connections knew that the newly rising Yuzukage had a conflict with a Yonko and actually came out victorious. Days after that, the world was shocked when a buster call was released upon the kingdom of Yuzu. However, instead of being obliterated until there was nothing left, Yuzu was still standing straight and continued to exist, and it grew even more prosperously under the ruling of the Yuzukage. And that was when the world knew that the mysterious Yuzukage was not someone to be messed with. Naru shook her head at her memories and looked at Jinbe. Just in case if you need anything, please don't hesitate to contact me, Jinbe. Jinbe gave her a grateful smile and said, "It's okay, Naru-san. I know that you refuse to be involved in piracy, so how could I trouble you with my own problem?" Naru just laughed at his words. "Silly. Do you think I care? How could I abandon a friend just like that? Naru-san. Plus, a friend who can even abandon a friend in trouble is just something that is worse than trash." She winked at him. Jinbe said nothing for a few moments as he was taken aback by her words, but then he grinned at her and said, "Then I'll thank you in advance." But he knew that no matter what would happen, he would never get his friend involved at all. At least, that was what he believed. The next day, at the port, Naru and the Straw Hats members were already on board the Thousand Sunny. A lot of people gathered here to see them off. "Can I just go with you? It's not like Olympius and the rest don't know how to return back to Yuzu on their own." Hody whined, only to get an eye roll in return. "After me, you have the highest authority over our people. So be a little bit more responsible, will ya?" Naru scolded him, not minding the fact that he was supposed to be the older one between them. "Naru-sama, we will be fine on our own. With the eternal pose, getting back home will not be a problem for us." Kanana, who looked a lot better now, assured her with a comforting smile. Olympius stood next to her with the same smile. "She's right, we will be fine, Naru-sama," he said. Naru just stared disapprovingly at them because of what they said, before she stared at Hody with a pointed look. While it was true that the others could still go back to Yuzu without Hody, Naru was just worried since the situation at the New World had gotten even crazier than before. She just didn't want to take the risk of some unforeseen circumstances happening to her people. She just wanted to avoid a troublesome situation. Hody just groaned at the dead look that she gave him, before he begrudgingly said fine. Naru just shook her head before turning her attention away from him. She looked at Luffy and his crew who were saying their farewell to the green-haired mermaid named Kami and the fishman named Hachi. When she saw Zoro and Sanji fighting for no reason, Naru just chuckled. She thought that sailing with these guys wouldn't be so bad. "Naru-chan." Nara looked up and saw the crying face of Shirahoshi, and she looked at her with such a sad look that almost made her resolve to crumble. You know I have to go eventually, right? Nara asked her, even though they both knew the answer to her question. But I promised you before, didn't I? Nara gave her a grin. One day, I'll bring you over to the surface, and you can see the rest of the world with your own two eyes. Shirahoshi sniffled and nodded her head. They had talked about this numerous times, so she just accepted it and hoped that the day they spoke of would come sooner. She then looked at the Straw Hats crew. Everyone, thank you so much for what you have for us. We will never forget your kindness. I hope we can see each other again. Shishishishi. Of course. Luffy gave her a thumbs up, followed by the rest who responded to her words with their own ways. As you wish, princess, Sanji said as he stared at her with a heart sign in his exposed eye. Your beauty alone is enough to make me want to stay here for the rest of my life. You know, maybe staying here is not so bad. It's not like we need you anyway, stupid cook, Zoro suddenly said. The heart in Sanji's eye immediately turned into flame as he glared at the hateful swordsman. What did you say, Marimo? And the two fought yet again. This time, nobody paid any attention to the two, as they were already used to seeing them fighting for no reason. Okay, you guys. Preparations for our departure are all ready. I already learned how to float up the ship, so shall we go? Announced the excited Frankie. Hearing Frankie said, Luffy looked at his sister first. When she nodded, he said Yash. Let's go. Naradano, we will pray for your safe journey, King Neptune said on behalf of everyone. Thank you, Naru responded. Hyde will be in charge in my place, so if there's anything that you need, please just speak with him. That guy needs to do some work around here too. A tick appeared on Hyde's forehead. Excuse me? I'll have you know I did a lot of work around here. Good. Keep it up. Naru grinned at him, while King Neptune laughed at their antics. The others exchanged their last words together before Luffy ordered for the sails to be spread. Naru then raised her hand and a blank piece of paper appeared in a small puff of smoke. She approached Nami and handed her the paper. This is Yuzu's Viva card, just follow where it wants us to go, and we will reach Dressrosa in no time. You got it! Nami gave her a thumbs up as she changed her old log pose into a new one that had been given by one of the ministers after being told that her old log pose was not suitable to be used in the new world. Dressrosa? I just have this, I can't go to this place or else I'll die disease, murmured Usopp with a dejected look as he imagined a certain Shichibukai that ruled over that place. Usopp, are you okay? The naive Chopper asked worriedly as he looked at his friend. Shishishishi, Luffy snickered. We're going to see Ace. When the ship started to move, Nara looked at Hyde and everyone else. She stared at Shirahoshi, who was still crying, but not as much as before, and waved at her. Take care, everyone. Nara-chan. Come and see me soon. Have a safe journey, Luffy-chin. Everyone. Goodbye. The ship sailed away from the island, heading towards the main entrance. As they were getting closer to the entrance, they saw a huge creature swimming lazily outside of the island. Look, it's Astra! Usopp shouted. As always, Luffy looked excited. Hey, why don't we bring him along? Hey! Join my. Stop it! Stop trying to invite weird creatures to join us. Nami slapped the back of Luffy's head before he could finish his sentence. Have a safe journey to the surface. Everyone on the ship heard the same voice in their heads. Knowing it was Astra, the crew and Naru waved at the sea serpent as the ship finally left the island via the main entrance. The ship was wrapped in a huge bubble before it fully exited the place. Thanks, Astra. Take care. Chopper waved happily. Goodbye, Naradano. The Neptune soldiers who were guarding the main entrance saluted as they wished them a safe journey. Nara thanked them before looking at Astra. Please look after the Fishman Island. As I should. He responded to her, before he swam away. Looking around the place, the crew was fascinated when they saw many sea creatures of all kinds around them. Unlike when they first arrived here, there were suddenly many fishes of all types swimming here and there. Nero concluded that whatever it was that caused the lives here to avoid the Fishman Island like a plague was not a problem anymore. It was probably because of Astra's intimidating presence, she thought. Once they left the vicinity of the Fishman Island, the crew looked forward with a look of anticipation as they wondered what kind of journeys they would face in the new world. Even the usually quiet Robin had a big smile on her face as she looked up to where they would go next. Neru, Zoro called out. After we reach the surface, we're going to Dressrosa, right? Neru nodded. Once we arrive there, we will meet up with Ace and Yuzu. If nothing happens, then I guess we will be able to reach Dressrosa before the tournament begins. A tournament, huh? Means that there will be some strong guys there, right? Zoro grinned. I want to join. I want to join too, Luffy chimed in. Just wait and see how I will beat Ace. Neru chuckled at his words and said, You gotta have to wait for another 10 years, Luffy. Luffy pouted at her and said, I'm telling you, I am a lot stronger than I was 2 years ago, Nei-chan. Neru just laughed and ruffled his hair as she said yes, yes. Luffy is indeed strong. His face brightened as he let out his familiar shishishi when she complimented him. The thought of sailing on the same ship as his older sister was like a childhood dream come true. And they were also on their way to see their other siblings. How great was that? It would be even more great if Sabo was also here with them. Then all 4 of them could go on an adventure like they often did when they were kids. Happy, Luffy proceeded to ask Neru more of what Ace was doing there. Where exactly was Sabo and when would they arrive in Dressrosa, etc. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew just watched the siblings with amusement in their eyes. At that moment, the same thought went through everyone's head. And that this journey would certainly be an interesting one. Later. It had been at least 1 hour since they left the Fishman Island. With so many hours left before they could reach the surface, everyone went to do their own things. Luffy, Usopp, and Chopper were trying to catch some fishes using their own fishing rods. Nami had warned them earlier to not do anything as stupid as risking the bubble to burst. Especially when earlier, they were almost getting swallowed by a large sea creature. Thankfully, everything went well. Zoro had left to do his own training. Frankie went to make sure that the condition of the ship was okay, while Robin was in her own room, probably reading some historical books or something. Neru was just done telling Nami of what they should expect, or might encounter once they arrived at the New World. As someone who lived in the New World for years, it was to be expected that Nami would seek out Neru in order to be more understanding of their new place. The navigator was busy looking over the many maps that she managed to obtain for the past 2 years, wondering which one of these places would be their next destination. Though she expected that after Dressrosa, the crew would probably go with their original plan to go to Yuzu with Neru. Luffy was exceptionally happy when Neru had told him that she would most likely go back to her kingdom once Ace won over the Guruguru Nomi. As expected, the young captain wished to go to Yuzu like he had said before, and Neru was more than happy to welcome him and his crew to her place. Right now, Neru was just on her way to the kitchen when she bumped into Brook, who was playing his violin. Since a while ago, their ears had been blessed with the beautiful sound of the violin. Brook. Neru greeted him first. The living skeleton, in turn, stopped playing his instrument and started to approach her. Yo-ho-ho-ho, Neru-san. Let it be my honor to say that you look so beautiful in that outfit. So beautiful that my eyes are about to pop out of my skull, but I don't have eyes anymore. Yo-ho-ho-ho, skull jokes. Neru just stared at him, amused, before looking down at herself. She was just wearing a casual white kikagi, paired with a dark-colored hakama as her pants. As usual, her hair was tied into a long ponytail. She didn't know which part of her appearance was so beautiful, but she was happy with the compliment nonetheless. Which woman didn't like being called beautiful? None. Smiling, she thanked him. Is there anything that I can help you with, Neru-san? Brook asked, staring right into her eyes with those 2 empty sockets of him. It would be a lie to say that she wasn't disturbed by it. After all, that was a living skeleton, all right. A once dead man that was currently staring at her like he was trying to look into her soul or something. For a long time, she wasn't actually a big fan of ghosts or things that could relate to horror stuff. Holding herself back from shivering, Nara shook her head and politely said it's okay. I was just on my way to the kitchen to see if I can help Sanji-kun with our meals. Yo-ho-ho-ho. Sanji-san's cooking is the best. I still remember the taste of my first warm meal after 50 years of not eating anything decent, and Sanji-san's food was so delicious that I could die from being so full. He claimed as he clapped his bony hand, before he suddenly paused and said, "Oh. But I'm already dead." Yo-ho-ho-ho. Nara's sweat dropped and chuckled nervously. Right. So, I'm just going to continue on my way. If you don't mind? Oh. How rude of me. Realizing that he was blocking her way, Brooke stepped aside. Then, like a gentleman, he bowed and said, "Please, go ahead, Nara-san." Despite his eccentric behavior, Nara knew that he was a good person and just being himself. So she smiled and added, "I think the music that you played just now was really great." Then she walked away. Even though she could still feel him burning holes into the back of her head, Nara just brushed it off and continued on her way to the kitchen. When she was already out of his sight, he let out a sigh. Brooke didn't say this to anyone, but because of his power, he was actually able to see a particular aura that could only belong to those who had already died. Like those scary zombies from Thriller Bark, dead people, and even from himself. And this particular aura appeared to him like a gloomy dark grayish fog. Brooke was a dead person once, so he was covered with the aura even until now, even though nobody else but him could see it. Like he said, only dead things could possess this kind of aura. So imagine his surprise and the total confusion that he felt when a healthy and obviously living person like Nara-san could radiate such a strong death aura from her whole person. When he first saw the woman at the dining hall of the Ryugu Palace for the first time, Brooke was extremely surprised. He had to take a double look at the woman who was speaking happily with Zoro-san to make sure that she was indeed alive and not dead. When she was introduced to be Luffy-san's older sister, Brooke refrained himself from commenting anything about the strangeness. He was confused, but most importantly, he was also worried. He was worried because Nara-san was someone who shared the same flesh and blood as his captain, and he knew that the boy truly loved his older sibling. Brooke didn't want anything to happen to Nara just because of the death aura that shouldn't be coming from a healthy living person. But since Nara-san herself was perfectly fine, then surely there wouldn't be anything horrible that would happen to her. Right? Brooke was uncertain. While Brooke was absorbed in his own thoughts, Nara had already arrived at the kitchen. She arrived just in time to see Sanji cutting a very huge watermelon in half. Seeing her at the doorway, Sanji paused in what he was doing and broke into a huge smile. "Nara-san, did you come here to see me?" Nara smiled at him and nodded. Sanji stared wide-eyed at her, clearly not expecting that she was actually here to see him. "Ah, really? I came to see if there is anything that I can help you with," she explained. The obviously happy Sanji had a blush on his face as he muttered to himself. To think that Nara-san herself would come to see me. What a happy day! As a gentleman, even if he had many things to do, he would never let a lady do his jobs. "It's okay, Nara-san. There isn't much to do around here, other than making food for those guys, and of course, for you ladies." "Oh. Are you hungry, Nara-san? How stupid I am. I will go and cook something for you right away." "That's okay. I'm not hungry," she said quickly, stopping Sanji before he could go and grab the ingredients in the fridge. "Then, what about a drink?" Nara thought for a while before she settled for one simple drink. "Then orange juice, please." "Right away, Nara-san." It didn't take long for him to make the drink, as it was easy to make. When he was done, Nara had already taken a seat and she was looking around the place. "Here you go, Nara-san." He placed the drink in front of her. "And also here, I got some fresh fruits before we left Sabayati, and I heard that this watermelon is very sweet." Beside a glass of orange juice, Sanji also gave her a plate full of watermelon that had been cut into red cubes. "Thank you, Sanji-kun." She smiled, making him blush again. "You're welcome." Not wanting to cause some awkwardness since she didn't really know what to say, she decided to start a topic that the two of them had in common. "I heard from Luffy that you used to work in Baratai, right?" Sanji was surprised, but his exposed eyes shone when she mentioned it. Yes. Have you been there before, Naruto-san? Even before she answered, he already knew the answer, but much to his surprise, she shook her head. I heard about it, but I haven't been there yet. Eh? She hadn't been there? Then who was the person that he met years ago? Sanji was confused. When he was 12, the bar-tai had already been open for at least 2 years. He wasn't good with cooking yet, so he was in charge of greeting the customers and leading them to their seats. And one of them was an older girl who was probably a couple of years older than himself. For the 12-year-old Sanji who was going through puberty, that older girl was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen, mainly because of her smile and how nice she was to him. He remembered her the most because of the unique birthmarks that she had on her face that reminded him of a cat. She also told him her name. Naru. Sanji remembered that day like it was yesterday. But if the person herself denied having been there before, then she also denied having met him. Did she perhaps forget? If that was the case, Sanji would be disappointed. Naru, of course, noticed the obvious dejected look on his face, and wondered what she said to cause him to be like this. Is there something wrong, Sanji-kun? Sanji looked flustered. And no, it's just that. Are you sure you haven't been there like maybe once when you were like 15 or 16? I left East Blue when I was 12, and I started to live in the New World when I was 16. By then, I was starting to get busy with Yuzu. She said. I see. Then maybe he was wrong then. Did he mistook her for someone else? By now, Naru had already figured out something based on his behavior and words alone. Did you meet someone who looked like me? Sanji then explained to her of his encounter with her from 9 years ago. Once he was done, instead of looking like she had just remembered something, she chuckled in amusement. In response, he blushed in embarrassment. Sanji-kun, it seems like I did go there after all, she said with a teasing smile. He was confused. But you said? Or my clone. This time, he was dumbfounded. Your clone? Instead of explaining it to him, she just summoned a couple of clones, surprising the younger man. This? A cloning ability? Yes. I can make clones of myself, and most of them are used for information gathering. The one that you met 9 years ago should be one of my clones in East Blue. Amazed, he asked, but wouldn't people be suspicious when they saw multiple people that look alike? Just then, her clones used henge to change their appearance, causing Sanji to be more impressed. Of course. Transformation. Making her clones to be someone else, it was a perfect plan for spying. And like she said, perfect for information gathering. Naru-san, you're one incredible lady. While he knew that Naru didn't eat any devil fruit, he was still impressed that a single person was able to use many powers and abilities. He recalled the terrifying battle between her and the sea serpent immediately. When she changed into a sea king, he was beyond impressed. He had also seen the rare video of her in marine furs, thanks to Ivankov. Like a goddess was his first impression when he saw the clip. Shining with golden light, nobody would disagree with him for saying that Naru looked like a goddess. Like the goddess of sun who descended from heaven just to save so many miserable lives. It wasn't his biased opinion alone, because many people also thought that she was a very benevolent being for saving so many people from the evils like the world nobles. But when she displayed such a terrifying power to attack Mary Geos, she suddenly turned into a goddess of destruction, or perhaps, a demoness to those that feared her. For Sanji, it didn't matter if she was a goddess or a demoness, she was amazing nonetheless. Sanji, who looked impressed and fascinated by her, suddenly became gloomy when he thought about how the person he admired didn't even remember him. Clone or not, they still met. As if knowing his inner thoughts, Naru comforted him. I'm sorry for not being able to remember you, Sanji-kun. But on the bright side, we can get to know each other even better from now on. With her words, his gloominess instantly disappeared as he beamed at her. Naru-san. I love you. Naru just laughed, since she knew that Sanji was a man who loved ladies. At that moment, Naru accompanied him as he prepared food for the others. And just like that, a new friendship bloomed.